Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alice Trappler. On April 19, 2012, an incident occurred in a remote area of upstate New York. At approximately 11 p.m., Frank Bennett called 911 to report that an intruder had broken into his home and killed his son, Daniel Bennett. After the attack, the intruder fled the scene. Frank reported that he did not witness the crime. He was in the basement when he heard the front door open and the lights turn on. A short time later, he heard a loud bang. Frank quickly ran upstairs, but when he reached the first floor, he only heard the sound of cars on the street. The mysterious intruder was gone, leaving behind a lifeless body. When the police arrived, they found Frank outside the house, in shock at what he had witnessed. The father could not believe that his beloved son was dead, and he was also afraid that the killer might return. After calming down, Frank's account was confirmed. The police entered the house and found Daniel lying on the sofa in the living room. It appeared that he had been attacked unexpectedly while he was sleeping. After examining the crime scene, forensic experts quickly discovered a spent ammunition box outside the door. It was clear that this was not a robbery because no valuables were missing, and there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The attacker had acted quickly, suggesting that the murder occurred in just a few seconds. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. Given the situation, the police suspected that it might be due to personal reasons. They began investigating Daniel's family and friends to gather more information. Frank suggested a possible motive for this violent act. His son was scheduled to appear in court the next day to fight for custody of his 5-month-old daughter, Lily. The divorce with Alice had been very difficult. Police considered Daniel's wife, Alice Trappler, to be the prime suspect in the case. Alice Trappler grew up in a small town called Addison. However, she was born in Philadelphia, where she lived with her parents before they bought a farm away from the city to raise their children. After graduating from high school, Alice moved away, attended college, and began working on a construction site in Texas. She eventually returned to Philadelphia and became a successful landscape designer. Alice was an energetic girl from a small town. As a child, she was a bit mischievous, but that did not affect her close relationship with her parents. She often drove 4 hours to Addison to visit them on weekends. During one of these visits, she met Thomas Wesley Borden, who became her first husband. This meeting took place in 2002. He had a troubled past, having dropped out of school in the 9th grade. Then a series of troubles began to plague him. Thomas often stole small items, had no steady job, and frequently worked as a repairman on local farms. This was his situation when he met Alice. He immediately fell in love with her vibrant and energetic personality. Thomas was attracted to Alice's natural beauty and intelligence. They had similar personalities, as they were both energetic and outgoing. At the time, Alice was in a relationship with another man, but she ended it for Thomas, and their romance quickly blossomed. Within 6 months, they were married and moved to Philadelphia, where Alice owned a house. Thomas supported Alice in everything. Alice had always dreamed of having a large family, but she struggled to conceive. Therefore, she took on the role of stepmother to Thomas's 2 daughters from a previous marriage. However, after only a few months of living together, Alice realized that she did not truly understand Thomas and had rushed into the marriage. At first, she tried to control their situation, but soon discovered that Thomas was unpredictable and irresponsible. He would often leave home for days at a time, leaving Alice and the children behind. This behavior frustrated Alice, while Thomas grew tired of her worries. Moreover, he showed little concern for Alice's feelings. Although she tried to maintain the marriage for 4 years, Alice eventually lost patience. She did not want to leave Thomas's children, to whom she was very attached, in the care of their irresponsible father. So, she filed for divorce and also requested custody. In 2009, a challenging trial began, with neither side willing to compromise. Finally, they reached an agreement that the girls would live with their paternal grandparents, who would take good care of them. Thomas's children still visit Alice in Addison regularly. After moving in with her mother in 2010, Alice bought an old farmhouse. She renovated the house, making use of her construction skills. Her business is thriving and is expected to grow even more in the near future. Overall, her life has improved significantly since the divorce. She has yet to realize her dream of having children of her own and rarely sees Thomas's children. Living alone has become boring for her. Her life changed dramatically when a new man, Daniel Bennett, entered her life. They met online in late 2010. He also grew up on a farm and is a strong man who always helps his parents with hard work. Daniel has a stubborn personality and can be rude, but he has never been in trouble with the law. In February 2011, Alice learned that she was pregnant. Overjoyed, she shared the news with Daniel, who was also delighted and decided to move in with her. They soon got married, but Alice's controlling nature soon emerged. She wanted to control every aspect of their lives, while Daniel valued his freedom and did not like being controlled. This led to frequent minor disagreements. These conflicts escalated, resulting in increasingly irrational arguments over small issues, which left Daniel frustrated. Just 6 months after meeting, the couple decided to split after Alice hit Daniel over the head with a coffee pot. He moved out, calling her crazy, and returned to live with his parents. However, Daniel still wanted to be involved in his daughter's life after she was born and sought to share custody, so he made an effort to maintain a relationship with Alice. Daniel contacted her almost every day to check on her well-being, but Alice never responded. She ignored all his messages, which frustrated him. Their relationship was strained. Alice often behaved rudely and even threatened him. She said that their communication felt like a conflict. In addition, she refused to see him and was hostile on the phone. It seemed that she did not want to maintain a relationship with him and did not want him to be a part of their child's life. 7 months after their separation, a baby girl was born. Alice did not inform Daniel about the birth and forbade him from seeing the child. This was a significant blow to Daniel, who had been pleading to see his daughter. However, Alice remained steadfast in her decision. So Daniel sought legal help to resolve the situation. According to the lawyer, the mother had no right to deny the father access to his daughter, but to prove this, a trial was necessary. Consequently, Daniel filed a lawsuit in family court to gain access to his child. The proceedings could be lengthy. Finally, a court date was set for April 20. This was a hopeful moment for Daniel, but the hearing never took place. He was murdered in his home the day before. Officers who arrived at the scene spoke to neighbors, some of whom confirmed hearing a loud bang just before an SUV drove away. The front door of the house was open, and Daniel was found dead. The only evidence was a spent 12-gauge cartridge case. A ballistics test is pending, which may provide further clues. Frank said that Daniel often complained about Alice's controlling behavior, especially after they split up when she forbade him from visiting their daughter. After breaking up with Alice, Daniel moved in with his father. On the day Daniel was killed, he was relaxing in front of the TV after a long day at work and fell asleep just before he was murdered. Frank also recalled that last Christmas, Alice called him out of the blue and asked to meet so he could see his granddaughter. He was delighted and agreed, but he used the opportunity to convince Alice to allow Daniel to see their child. He believed that children should have a relationship with both their father and mother. However, Alice became defensive and firmly stated that she would never allow Daniel to see their child. Frank was extremely upset, feeling that Alice's decision was both illegal and unjustified. He believed that Daniel would make a great father and saw no justification for Alice's restrictions. After Alice's call, Daniel sought legal help and went to court, but his hearing was repeatedly postponed until it was rescheduled. Tragically, a murderer disrupted all his plans. The police quickly established a motive for the crime, believing that the connection was not random. First, they needed to talk to Alice, who arrived at the courthouse at around 5 a.m., the day after the murder. Just hours later, Lily's custody hearing took place. The police considered her the prime suspect, and at that time, she was living in Addison, 30 kilometers from the scene of the tragedy. Alice was surprisingly calm when she heard the news of her ex-husband's death. When the police spoke to Alice, it was clear that she was very angry with him. She recounted that he had often insulted her and had been abusive throughout their time together. Alice described Daniel as a bad person who struggled with drug addiction. She also mentioned that they were in a custody battle over their daughter, a legal struggle that Daniel had initiated, and that she was determined not to give in to him. Despite this hostility, Alice insisted that she had nothing to do with the murder. She claimed that she had an alibi for the time of the incident, stating that she was at home with her mother, who later confirmed her story. When asked about a handgun, Alice denied ever having used it, and the police confirmed that the weapon was not registered in her name. However, this did not eliminate her as a suspect, as she could have purchased the weapon illegally, and her alibi was not entirely reliable. Unfortunately, the police were unable to find any information that could advance the case. They then chose to investigate Daniel's other acquaintances and friends who might have had a motive for the crime. Many described Daniel as a difficult person who frequently got into fights at bars. As a result, the police identified several potential suspects who had conflicts with Daniel in various ways. They compiled a long list of these individuals and began interviewing them. Although each had grievances against Daniel, none had a strong motive for the murder. The investigation was losing momentum, and it was clear that a vital lead was needed, as there were too many angry residents in the city who might want to take revenge on him. It was necessary to narrow down the list of suspects. One of Daniel's neighbors went to the police station after the murder. While she was getting the mail, she discovered a shotgun shell casing on the road. Concerned, she reported her discovery to the sheriff's department. At first glance, the shell casing did not seem unusual since hunting season had just begun, and many people in rural areas used that type of ammunition. However, because it was close to the crime scene, it had the potential to be important evidence. When the police arrived, they compared the shell casing to the one that caused Daniel's death. They found that they were an exact match. The police were then able to trace the shell casing to the store where it was purchased. They searched the area around where the shell casing was found and discovered 3 more shell casings. All of these had been purchased from the hunting section of a local Walmart. This discovery provided a vital lead in the investigation. The police requested surveillance footage from the store and reviewed it. They identified a man who had purchased the boxes of ammunition just 4 hours before the murder, around 7 p.m. The footage clearly showed him, and the police were able to track him as he left the store, including his license plate, thanks to outdoor cameras. The police quickly identified the owner of one of the vehicles as Thomas West Borden, Alice's first husband. While this footage was not enough to convict him, it was a clue for the police to investigate Thomas further. They had 2 main suspects, Alice and Thomas. It was likely that they had planned to kill Daniel together. While Thomas could be considered a potential perpetrator or accomplice, the only evidence against him was the purchase of the ammunition. Alice was not officially considered a suspect because she had an alibi confirmed by her mother. The GPS on her phone showed that she was at home, but the seasoned police officer suspected that she might be the mastermind behind the events. The police contacted Thomas, asking him to come to the station for questioning without providing a specific reason. They hoped to indirectly confirm their suspicions through him. However, Thomas informed the police over the phone that he was out of town at the time of the call. He could not provide an exact date for his return, saying that he could be absent for 2 weeks to a month due to important business. He then stated that unless the police had a warrant for his arrest, he had no intention of going to the police station over a minor matter. This situation raised suspicion, and he understood why they wanted to talk to him. As the phone conversation continued, Thomas became increasingly anxious. At one point, he suddenly declared that he would kill himself if the pressure did not ease. The police realized the urgency of the situation and knew that they needed to quickly locate Thomas before he did anything drastic. They decided to track the GPS location of the call and found him near a cell tower in a suburb of Philadelphia, along with his car. Soon, the pursuit began. The chase lasted only a few blocks before Thomas abandoned his pickup truck in a parking lot and fled on foot. However, another police unit arrived to stop him. Thomas gave a false name, but when asked for identification, he surrendered his driver's license. When the officers discovered the lie, they acted quickly to arrest him. Thomas began to run away again, leading several cars and police officers to chase him. They pursued him to the nearest train tracks, possibly because he intended to use the train to escape and distract the police. However, Thomas was exhausted and realized that he could not outrun them. In a moment of desperation, he jumped in front of a train and took his own life. Some even blamed the police for his death. This development left the police without their only lead regarding Daniel's murder. In their desperation, the police decided to talk to people who had interacted with Thomas in the days before his death. Thomas's half-brother Nathan Hand lived with him. Shortly before Daniel's murder, Thomas had moved in with Nathan, and they spent a lot of time together. During this period, Thomas rekindled his relationship with Alice and felt happy, as he had struggled to cope with their breakup. He had hoped to reunite with her, so he agreed to resume contact. However, Nathan suspected that Alice had an ulterior motive for returning to Thomas. Nathan said that just before the incident, Alice had made a request regarding Daniel. For the sake of the person he loved, Thomas agreed to everything and followed Alice's instructions. Nathan recalled that at around 8 p.m. on April 19, Thomas returned from Walmart and quickly began preparing for something important, saying that he would confront Daniel at Alice's request. Nathan observed that Thomas was wearing camouflage pants, a dark shirt, and a mask. When asked about his plans, Thomas insisted that he would confront Daniel. Nathan tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. Thomas asked Nathan to drive him to Daniel's house. During the drive, Thomas revealed that he not only intended to beat Daniel, but also to kill him. He was determined to get rid of Daniel once and for all. Despite Nathan's attempts to convince him otherwise, Thomas also mentioned that this plan originated with Alice. He kept in touch with her throughout the evening via phone and text messages. When they arrived at Daniel's house around 11 p.m., Thomas retrieved the weapons from the trunk of the car. He claimed that Alice had given him the weapons for this purpose and that he had purchased the ammunition. They got out of the car and stood on either side of the front door. Nathan pushed the door open and turned on the lights, allowing Thomas to rush inside and kill Daniel. They then fled the scene, jumping into the car and driving away. As they left, Thomas threw the remaining shell casings out the window, landing in a neighbor's yard and eventually leading the police to their door. Nathan claimed that they buried the weapons at the park. Police were able to locate the weapon based on Nathan's description. He also mentioned that Alice was not present during the attack. She was at home and was in contact with Thomas on the phone. Nathan was arrested in connection with the crime. On April 24, a deputy sheriff visited Alice's home, and she denied any involvement in the crime. In 2013, Alice went to trial for the murder of Daniel Bennett. She was charged with multiple crimes, facing a possible sentence of 15 years to life in prison. By this time, Thomas, the real perpetrator, was dead. The prosecution argued that he was just a pawn controlled by the real mastermind behind the crime. They believed that Alice had planned and manipulated Thomas into carrying out the act. The prosecution gathered a significant amount of evidence that linked Alice to the crime. Evidence included correspondence between her and Thomas discussing the case, as well as surveillance camera footage showing Thomas purchasing ammunition. Additionally, Thomas's half-brother Nathan confirmed Alice's involvement in the crime. Nathan Hand reached a plea deal to shorten his sentence by pleading guilty to manslaughter in exchange for helping to solve the case, resulting in a 9-year prison sentence. The defense attempted to exonerate Alice, acknowledging her hostility toward Daniel. They argued that the situation was an act of self-defense, claiming that Alice had endured domestic violence for 6 months. They asserted that Alice, a victim of violence as a child, was determined to prevent her daughter from experiencing the same, which explained her strong opposition to sharing custody with Daniel. After deliberations, the jury unanimously convicted Alice Trappler of premeditated murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Throughout the trial, she remained calm, showing no remorse or emotion. Alice expressed dissatisfaction with her 25-year prison sentence and filed several appeals, all of which were rejected. Zoe Gabrielle Campos was born in September 1995 in Lubbock, Texas. She was the youngest daughter of her parents, Melinda and Alejandro Campos III. She had an older sister, Savannah. Their father served in the Navy infantry, which caused the family to move frequently, but after a few years, they eventually returned to Lubbock. Melinda and Alejandro eventually divorced. While growing up, Zoe had many different hobbies, but most of all, she loved animals. Zoe's mother said that the girl often brought home stray animals. She has a kind heart, wants to help all animals, especially dogs, cats, and turtles. Zoe was very close to her mother from a young age. Her mother mentioned that people often joked about how Zoe and she had forgotten to cut the umbilical cord. Zoe was an incredible daughter, sister, and friend. She was cheerful, funny, but very caring. Zoe was also interested in mechanics and spent her free time repairing cars. Shortly before her disappearance, she started working on an old car that she hoped to restore herself. Her mother said that if Zoe could open a pet store next to an auto repair shop, she would definitely do it. Zoe had a wonderful relationship with her sister Savannah, and they spent a lot of time together. Savannah had 2 children, and Zoe loved being an aunt. She enjoyed taking her nephew fishing at a lake not far from their home. Despite being only 18 years old, Zoe was very mature and extremely responsible. She didn't go out partying, preferred the silence and cozy atmosphere at home. Unfortunately, all of this was taken away from her. On November 17, 2013, Zoe spent most of the day with her family. Later that evening, she planned to go to her friend April's house, where a baby had just been born, and April invited her closest friends to celebrate the occasion. It was not a big party, but rather a small gathering of friends, and of course, everyone there knew April. However, not all the guests knew each other. It was a normal evening. Everyone was chatting, and a friend mentioned that Zoe left around 9 p.m. because she planned to go to dinner with her sister Savannah. They intended to spend the evening with another friend. Savannah later reported that during dinner, Zoe was as carefree as ever. After dinner, everyone went to watch a movie. When the sisters returned home, Zoe planned to spend the night at Savannah's house to take care of her nephew and niece the next day while Savannah was at work. Savannah stated that the movie ended at 11:30 p.m., and during the film, Zoe seemed to fall asleep. When they got home, Savannah went to her room, thinking that Zoe would sleep on a couch in the living room, unaware that the next morning, her sister would be gone. Zoe left the house later that night when Savannah went to bed, which was out of character for her. It is known that Zoe left home at night from an emergency message her mother received at 2:30 a.m. Melinda worked at a bar that closed around that time, and she was pleasantly surprised when she got a message from her daughter, asking for a ride home. Melinda waited for about 30 minutes, but Zoe never showed up. Initially, Melinda was not too troubled and tried to call her daughter, but Zoe didn't answer. Melinda thought that maybe Zoe had simply fallen asleep. Melinda reached a friend's house near the bar and stayed there overnight, planning to return home in the morning. On November 18th, Zoe's sister woke up and began getting ready for work. Seeing that Zoe was not on the couch and not in the house, Savannah immediately started calling her. When Zoe didn't answer and her car wasn't parked outside, Savannah thought Zoe might have gone home early. She called again, but each time, the call went straight to voicemail. Savannah then contacted her mother and realized that she also couldn't reach Zoe. Panic ensued. Savannah and Melinda started calling hospitals to see if perhaps Zoe had been in an accident. However, after several hours without contact or any information, the women finally reported Zoe's disappearance to the police at around 5 p.m. The police could only accept a missing persons report after 24 hours. Fortunately, they agreed to send out a profile of Zoe's car and attempted to contact her mobile service provider. They were informed that Zoe's phone was either turned off or the battery had been removed. Then, a surprising coincidence occurred. Zoe's aunt, Monica Rivas, was driving through the city on November 20th when she spotted her niece's gray Lincoln car near the university on 62nd Street. Monica immediately followed the car, trying to see the driver, but found it difficult due to the tinted windows and the car's speed. Still, she managed to determine that the driver was a man dressed in a hoodie with a darker complexion, and he appeared to be about 20 years old. As Monica followed the car, a lot of questions raced through her mind. Was Zoe in the car? Had this person harmed her? These thoughts nearly overwhelmed her, so she decided to focus on following the car while calling her son to explain the situation. However, the driver of the pursued car seemed to realize he was being followed and tried to escape. Eventually, Monica lost sight of the car when it turned sharply south, but she persisted in her search. When her son joined her, they found the Lincoln parked near Zoe's apartment. Monica immediately called the police and had to wait about an hour for the officers to arrive. Unfortunately, Zoe was not in the car, and she remained listed as missing. After inspecting the car, the police discovered several items: a phone charger, a black jacket, a sweatshirt, and some duct tape. They collected all of these items as evidence and lifted fingerprints from the vehicle. Since Zoe's father was an active member of the Marine Corps, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service became involved in assisting with the investigation. They took the jacket for forensic examination to look for any traces that could lead them to Zoe. The investigators also needed to find out if anyone had seen her on November 17th from 11:30 p.m. onward. Based on her latest text messages, mobile phone operators helped to estimate her approximate location, which indicated that she had been within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field, a local football field. This area had a reputation for crime and other societal issues, which surprised Zoe's friends and family. Zoe did not use illegal substances and had no involvement in what is known as human trafficking, raising their concerns about the location where she was last seen. The investigators tried to speak with everyone who had been at April's house the night Zoe went missing, hoping someone might have heard or seen something unusual regarding Zoe's behavior or conversations. They discovered that a man named Carlos Rodriguez attended the party. When questioned on November 25th, Carlos claimed he did not know Zoe before they met at April's but mentioned they had conversed briefly. He stated that they left at almost the same time, but the investigators found something odd in his story, something felt insincere. As a result, Carlos was called in for additional questioning on December 9th. During this session, the investigators received significantly different information. Carlos admitted he had lied earlier, that he and Zoe communicated on Facebook after leaving April's. He said they had agreed to meet at his house that night to chat, but he continued to deny any involvement in Zoe's disappearance. He claimed she had come over, they intended to smoke marijuana, but when they had none, so Zoe left to find some and never returned. Carlos explained his initial deceit was due to not wanting to get in trouble over banned substance. However, he became the primary suspect in the case. Given that he had lied previously, investigators wondered if he was telling the complete truth this time. It turned out that his house was within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field. In 2014, Zoe's family hired their own investigator to pursue any leads they came across, and they received numerous messages from community members eager to assist in the investigation. The investigators insisted that Carlos knew more than he disclosed. Eventually, they obtained a search warrant and investigated his residence. The police dogs brought and found several traces of Zoe's scent in that house and in the alley. The police conducted thorough searches of the premises but found no additional evidence. Over the course of 2015 and 2016, the entire community aided in the search, spreading awareness by posting flyers featuring photos of Zoe in hopes that someone might remember her or provide clues. As the years passed, Zoe's family and loved ones clung to hope for her safe return. On November 16, 2016, relatives and community members held a candlelight vigil to honor Zoe, who had gone missing 3 years prior. Over the years, investigators continued to seek the truth from Carlos. He was repeatedly called in for questioning, yet each time, his account of meeting Zoe evolved. However, when investigators found DNA on Carlos's jacket, he had to admit that Zoe had been in his house and in his room for some time. That night, Carlos was interrogated at the Lubbock County Detention Center. During investigations into Carlos, it was revealed that he had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, who said Carlos had threatened her with violence on several occasions. At that point, investigators were sure there was more to his story, but they needed concrete evidence before they could request another warrant. Then, another inmate, who was serving time with Carlos, mentioned in a conversation about the search that was being conducted at Carlos's house that, "The police have searched, the body will not be found until the concrete is removed." This statement was later confirmed by an informant who, on July 31, 2018, contacted detectives to tell them that Carlos had confessed to him where he hid Zoe's body. The informant provided specific details from Carlos's words about where the body could be found, which was enough to obtain another search warrant. In November 2018, the same team of police officers, accompanied by service dogs, went to conduct a search in the backyard. The dogs alerted the police, and they began digging in that area. Eventually, they discovered a set of bones. The bones were sent for examination, but before determining whose they were, there was no certainty that they were human remains. Carlos was called in for questioning, and in the middle of the interrogation, when the bones were mentioned, he fell silent, refused to talk until he was granted access to a lawyer. The lab results came quickly, revealing that the bones were not Zoe's, but rather animal bones. Investigators decided not to inform Carlos of this, as his reaction when the bones were mentioned suggested that the investigation was close to solving Zoe's case. In the following days, Carlos was closely watched, as were those he communicated with. After monitoring some of his conversations, investigators realized that Carlos genuinely believed they had found Zoe's remains. On November 14th, the police used ground-penetrating radar to identify additional areas to dig. However, before digging commenced, Carlos requested to speak with the lead detective. During this meeting, Carlos gave a full confession. He explained that on the night he and Zoe were together, they decided to use an illegal substance. After taking it, he went crazy, hit Zoe hard in the face, put her in a chokehold, and took her life. Carlos claimed that he buried Zoe that night in his backyard and later relocated her body to a deeper grave. Investigators took Carlos to the residence where he showed them the location of Zoe's remains. Just after 10 p.m. on November 16, 2018, Zoe's decomposed remains were found. Carlos was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest warrant stated that Carlos Rodriguez confessed to killing Zoe in the house in which he committed the crime early in the morning of November 18, 2013. Zoe's remains were sent for forensic examination. Since much time had passed and the body had decomposed, they had to use dental records to confirm the identity of the remains. Zoe's father explained that when he sat down with relatives and told them that the body belonged to Zoe, everyone felt some relief, knowing that Zoe was not lost or suffering, and while this part of the tragedy was over, the pain remained. Despite Carlos's full admission of guilt, he later maintained in court that he was innocent. He also published a letter intended for the media in which he reiterated his claim of innocence, stating that he and Zoe had met at April's house for the first time and that they had shared some flirtation. Carlos claimed that when he sent Zoe a message on Facebook late at night, they agreed to talk at his house. He stated that during the conversation, his mind, clouded by the substance, distorted reality, leading him to perceive Zoe as having an evil grin before he struck her. He said he did not remember how he managed to catch up to her, and that he regretted the actions he took, having lived for 5 years with guilt over the murder. Carlos apologized to Zoe's family in his letter, asking them to forgive him and encouraging them not to succumb to hatred. He also claimed he had to bury Zoe's body after it began to be unearthed by dogs. He and his lawyers prepared for trial, arguing that his original confession had been coerced because he had not been represented by a lawyer at the time. However, the judge ruled that both Carlos's oral and written confessions were legally obtained, could be used in court. On August 15, 2022, Carlos changed his plea from not guilty to an open plea, meaning he did not make a deal with prosecutors but planned to use his chances in court. He faced a minimum sentence of 5 years and a maximum of life imprisonment. After a brief deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict on August 18, sentencing Carlos Rodriguez to life imprisonment for the murder of Zoe Campos. In 2020, the story of a young British woman named Angel Lynn shocked the entire United Kingdom. She had been stuck in a harmful relationship with a man involved in crime who faced serious legal issues. Whenever Angel tried to leave, the situation worsened. During her last attempt to escape, it turned into a kidnapping and a life-threatening incident. Thankfully, Angel survived, but her life now is very different. Angel Lynn was born in a suburb of Loughborough, Leicestershire in England Midlands. She was the youngest daughter in a family of 6 children. Her parents, Patrick, often called Paddy by friends, and Nikki, were ordinary people. Patrick operated a small retail business, while Nikki dedicated herself to managing the household and caring for their children. Although the Lynn family was not wealthy, their business provided a steady income to meet their basic needs. They lived in a spacious and comfortable home, working hard to ensure their children received a good education. Angel had a strong, loving bond with her family, especially with her mother, Nikki. She confided in her mom about everything, her future plans, dreams, and concerns. From a young age, Angel was very energetic. She excelled in school, participated in sports, and had many friends. Others viewed her as ambitious, principled, someone who stood up for what was right. She aspired to attend college to study law and work in the justice system. Angel was well known for her stunning looks and slender. With her bright blonde hair, deep blue eyes, she always drew attention and brightened up any event. Many people admired her, but she seldom went on dates due to her busy schedule. Angel cherished her independence and was committed to being self-sufficient. While still in high school, she worked part-time as a waitress at a local fast food restaurant. She diligently saved money for college and bought her own clothes, makeup, and personal items. After finishing high school, Angel successfully entered her dream college. She chose to become a crime scene investigator and enrolled in a program to help her reach that goal. She juggled her studies, work, and sports with impressive energy. Everything was going smoothly until she met a young man named Che Boskill, who took everything away from her. Che Boskill was the younger son of his mother. He grew up with his older half-brother. His mother single-handedly raised the boys, as neither of their father was involved in their lives. She worked multiple jobs from early morning to late at night to support them, which meant that money was always tight. Because she was rarely home, she spent little time with the boys, leaving them to take care of themselves in less than ideal living conditions. Che exhibited aggressive behavior from a young age, causing concern among those around him. He frequently had outbursts of anger, got into fights, and faced continuous trouble. As a teenager, he encountered legal issues and was arrested multiple times. Despite this, his mother always intervened to defend him, viewing her younger son as nearly perfect despite his actions. His older brother also faced legal troubles, but Che ultimately became a more serious offender while still in school. Nevertheless, their mother did not see any issue with their behavior and did not view them as a bad person. At only 15 years old, Che got involved in crime. He began by stealing cars and taking them apart for parts. Soon after, he joined a local gang where he quickly built a reputation, found his role. It's important to mention that Che was following his brother's path. However, his brother was less aggressive and better at managing his anger. Che loved motorcycles and cars, but instead of just driving, he sped down the streets at high speeds. He obtained his driver's license and, for some time, drove cars for his friends in the gang. By the age of 18, he had purchased his own car with money earned from illegal activities. He frequently drove while under the influence of alcohol and banned substance. On one occasion, he caused a serious accident by crashing into a utility pole, which resulted in him being hospitalized. Although he lost his driver's license, he continued to drive stolen cars and even live-streamed his dangerous driving around town. As Che became more entrenched in organized crime, he escalated from minor crimes like petty theft and carjackings to more severe offenses, including robbery and banned substance dealing. He and his associates began to steal luxury cars on demand and targeted affluent individuals. Che took pride in being a bad guy. Despite being arrested multiple times, he consistently managed to evade significant penalties, often receiving only light sentences. Che had a captivating appearance and a charming personality, despite his reckless behavior and self-destructive lifestyle. Even as a teenager, he easily attracted the attention of girls. When his illegal activities started making money, he spent it lavishly to impress those he liked. However, his bad temper and aggressive nature prevented him from maintaining any meaningful relationships. Che was a manipulative bully who wasn't afraid to resort to violence. While he could initially charm a girl, most would leave once they recognized his true nature. Unfortunately, not everyone was fortunate enough to get away. In early 2019, Angel met a man while spending time with mutual friends. They were both the same age and attended the same university, quickly discovering that they had much in common. Their immediate chemistry led to a budding friendship that soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Within a few weeks, they introduced each other to their families, indicating that they were serious about their commitment. Hattie and Nikki were pleased with their daughter's choice, as her boyfriend came from a good family and was a decent person. Similarly, his parents welcomed Angel warmly. They spent a lot of time at each other's homes. Their friends and family often joked about a possible wedding in the future. Just 6 months into their intense relationship, they unexpectedly broke up for unclear reasons. Her boyfriend initiated the breakup, leaving Angel feeling heartbroken. Shortly after, he began dating someone new, prompting Angel to distance herself from mutual friends to avoid seeing them together. She found herself isolated, without her boyfriend or friends. Though her family supported her, she fell deeper into sadness. Even focusing on her studies and work didn't provide much relief. During a challenging period in her life, Angel met someone who would become very important to her. By chance, she crossed paths with Che. He was immediately taken with her beauty. He approached her, asked why she seemed sad, suggested they take a walk and get coffee. Angel needed someone to confide in, and Che proved to be a surprisingly good listener. They exchanged phone numbers, quickly began talking and meeting regularly. Che made an effort to impress her with his kindness and support. Before long, Angel realized she was developing feelings for him. At that moment, she truly believed she had found someone deserving of her time, effort. Che tried to impress Angel by showering her with expensive gifts, taking her to trendy clubs, restaurants, and concerts. She wanted to learn more about his job, but he was very good at concealing his illegal activities. One evening, Angel invited him to dinner at her parents' house. What was supposed to be a warm family meal turned into a heated argument due to Che's arrogant behavior, which upset Angel's parents. Afterward, Nikki, Angel's mother, expressed her concerns about Che and urged Angel to end the relationship. To avoid upsetting her parents, Angel told them that she and Che were just friends, promised to spend less time with him. However, Angel and Che continued their secret relationship, never thinking about breaking up. Che made reservations at fancy hotels for their romantic evenings together. Angel felt she was with a good man, she had fallen in love with him. Che was still in frequent contact with his girlfriend. They called each other many times a day and sent constant texts. He often inquired about her whereabouts, activities, companions. Trusting him, Angel shared everything, believing this was his way of showing he cared. Unfortunately, this was actually the start of his controlling and manipulative behavior. In just a few months, Che learned everything about Angel, her whereabouts, her friends, her work and school schedules. He earned her trust and started to distance her from friends he didn't like. He pressured Angel to lie to her parents, creating a rift between her and her family. By August 2019, his control grew stronger. He dictated her clothing choices, restricted her conversations, even banned her from wearing makeup. Che regularly checked her phone, deleting contacts he disapproved of. He constantly monitored her, questioning her about unplanned outings and showing up if she was out longer than usual. The situation escalated to the point where Angel couldn't greet a male acquaintance without provoking a fierce argument. Her parents started to notice significant changes in her behavior. Once lively, cheerful, Angel became pale and withdrawn. She stopped wearing makeup, started dressing in baggy clothes, and seemed constantly anxious. She became secretive, always clutching her phone and hurrying away to be alone whenever it rang. Her conversations with her mother and sisters dwindled, leading them to become suspicious. When anyone asked how she was doing, she insisted everything was fine, but her reassurances sounded less convincing each time. As a result, the distance grew between Angel and her family. Che took control of her life, turning her from a vibrant young woman into someone isolated and invisible, who believed her only worth was to him. Che began to control every part of Angel's life, even trying to persuade her to quit school and work, promising to handle everything for her. Despite this, Angel was determined to pursue her dreams. Che's control grew stronger. He accessed her social media accounts, installed a tracking app on her phone. He monitored her every move and conversation. He could appear anywhere at any time, which made Angel feel constantly anxious, on edge. Under his pressure, Angel got a tattoo of his name on her arm, as if he had branded her as his own. Che treated her like property. He would call her multiple times a day, even at night, insisting that she turn on her camera so he could see where she was and who was with her. Angel reached her breaking point, tried to end the relationship several times, but Che refused to let her go. What started as a romantic relationship turned into pure manipulation. Che effectively stalked her, controlling her every action, all under the guise of love and concern. In January 2020, Che and several friends were arrested for trying to steal a car, received 4-month prison sentences. For Angel, this seemed like an opportunity to break free from a toxic relationship that was going nowhere. However, she was wrong. Every day, Che was allowed to make a phone call, and he used it each evening to contact Angel. His friends watched her and reported back to him. Angel felt constantly monitored and powerless to escape her fear. At the end of May, Che was released from prison. He immediately went to Angel's house and caused a scene. When Angel tried to break up with him again, he demanded that she pay him back about £80, which he claimed to have spent on her before he was imprisoned. Angel quickly gave him all the money she had saved, but the harassment worsened. A week later, Che physically attacked Angel for the first time. Just a week after that, he assaulted her again, and a bystander, concerned for Angel's safety, called the police. However, Angel chose not to press charges, so Che faced no repercussions. On July 9, 2020, a neighbor of Che's called the police because he heard a woman screaming for help. At that time, Che had pinned Angel to the ground and hit her head against the floor. Although Angel needed medical help afterward, she did not report the incident. In the following months, she continued to experience psychological and physical abuse from Che. Fearful of what Che might do to her or her family, she remained silent about the situation and tried to endure it, even though she realized it couldn't last forever. In September of that year, Angel made the difficult decision to end her relationship for good. Che reacted strongly, physically attacking her, leaving her with scrapes and significant bruises on her face. After the incident, he appeared to calm down, even apologized, vowing to be more respectful in the future. However, Angel believed he wouldn't genuinely change and pushed to end the relationship entirely. She felt certain that the toughest and most dangerous challenges were still ahead, but she was prepared to face them. Che, after making several attempts to win Angel back, proposed that they should at least stay friends. Angel agreed, thinking that if he believed they were still on good terms, he might lose interest in her, stop pursuing her. On September 17, 2020, Angel went to work, later committed to picking up Che and his friend Rocco Sansom in their van. They frequently relied on her as their driver, especially when they were too drunk or under the influence of substances to drive themselves. That day was no exception. Angel arrived at the designated parking lot, where the van was parked. Che and Rocco were waiting. Once everyone was inside the van, they drove off. Angel and Che had a heated argument while driving. She pulled over, stopped the vehicle, and jumped out, running away quickly. This incident was recorded by street surveillance cameras. In the footage, Che can be seen angrily chasing after her. He catches her and forces her back into the van before taking the driver's seat himself. The vehicle then sped away, completely disregarding traffic laws. This situation amounted to a kidnapping, as Angel was trapped inside the van with two men. She was clearly terrified. It's unclear what she experienced during that time. In the next 15 minutes, the police received numerous reports about a suspicious van speeding away from town, with the driver behaving erratically. However, officers couldn't respond in time before a tragic event occurred. Suddenly, the passenger door of the van flew open, and Angel fell out at high speed, narrowly avoiding being struck by two cars following closely behind. Fortunately, the drivers reacted quickly and stopped their vehicles. They rushed to her aid. Someone called the police. Meanwhile, the van continued for about 100 kilometers per hour as if nothing had happened, then slowed down and returned to the scene. To any onlookers, it might have appeared that the driver had simply dropped something small and returned to retrieve it. Che approached the gathering calmly, told those present that the injured young woman was his girlfriend, that they had just argued. He said he wanted to break up with her and that she had lost control, attempting to jump out of the moving van. However, his account seemed unconvincing. He stayed on the scene, waited for the medics and police to arrive, repeating his story verbatim. It was evident that he believed Angel wouldn't survive. He seemed to be shifting all the blame onto her. His friend Rocco, who was also in the van, supported his version of events, mirroring his words. Despite her severe injuries, Angel was still breathing when she was rushed to the nearest hospital by ambulance. Unfortunately, the chances of saving her were low. She had broken ribs, broken limbs, a compression fracture in her spine, and many cuts, bruises. The most critical injury was a traumatic brain injury that led to significant bleeding in her brain. For several days, doctors fought tirelessly to save her life. She underwent multiple complex surgeries, including one to remove part of her skull to relieve pressure on her brain. Her heart stopped several times, and she was clinically dead on those occasions, but the medical team was able to revive her each time. Eventually, Angel was placed in a medically induced coma and put on life support. Her chances of waking up were nearly non-existent. The doctors were astonished that she had survived the initial accident, but their outlook was bleak. They warned the Lin family that, even if she miraculously survived and could breathe independently, she would likely remain bedridden and in a permanent vegetative state. They suggested considering the option of disconnecting her from the costly life support machines, but her parents refused to even think about it. Che and Rocco were held at the scene and taken to the police station for questioning. They both insisted they had done nothing wrong, claiming that Angel was out of control and that the incident stemmed from her attempts to take her own life. However, security camera footage showed a different reality. Che was charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, causing serious physical harm. Rocco was arrested as an accomplice. Both remained in jail while waiting for their court appearances. The trial started in January 2022, with new charges of assault and harassment added. The defendants did not admit guilt. The prosecutors failed to provide clear evidence that Angel was intentionally thrown from the moving van. As a result, the jury could not come to a unanimous verdict, leading to the defendants receiving relatively light sentences. Rocco was sentenced to just 21 months in prison for his involvement, while Che received a 7-year sentence. The Attorney General referred Che Bauskill's sentence to the Court of Appeal under the lenient sentences scheme. In March 2022, the court increased his sentence to 12 years. However, Che will still be eligible for parole after serving 8 years. Despite the doctor's discouraging predictions, Angel continued to fight for her life. Although she suffered significant brain damage, she eventually began to breathe on her own. After a few months, the doctors lifted her from the medically induced coma. Initially, she did not recognize anyone, could not control her movements, and needed to be fed through a tube. There were no indications that she was aware of her surroundings. Meanwhile, Angel's cousin, Farron Davis, has set up a GoFundMe page to help her recover from the horrific incident. Kind strangers and members of her community have donated nearly £200,000, which will be used to renovate the family home, as they have received no assistance from the council. Angel is now doing well and will soon be able to move out of the flat and live with her family once the construction work is complete. Her sister, Rhiannon, is planning to move nearby from Newcastle so she can join her mother in looking after her. In the spring of 2022, her parents brought her home to care for her themselves. A year later, in May 2023, Angel amazed everyone by starting to respond to her environment. Just a month after that, she looked at her mom, Nikki, and called out, "Mom." Now, Angel Lynn is going through a lengthy rehabilitation process, has even begun to take her first steps. Although the doctors are skeptical about her returning to her previous life, her parents refuse to accept that possibility because their daughter has shown time and again that she is a fighter. October 1st, 2020, and the quiet neighborhood of Reedley, just outside Burnley, England, seemed like any other morning. Residents on Colne Road were starting their day, with kids heading to school and folks grabbing their morning coffee. But at 8:45 a.m., a call came into Lancashire Constabulary that would shatter the calm. When officers arrived, they were met with a scene that would haunt them, a home scarred by smoke and fire. Inside, the lifeless bodies of Dr. Samanmir Sacharvi and her daughter, Vian Mangrio. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, police scrambling for answers. Dr. Saman was a respected psychiatrist at the Lancaster and South Cumbria NHS Foundation Trust. Vian, a bright student at Marsden Heights High School in nearby Nelson, was known for her academic spark and enthusiasm for life. The two living together in their Colne Road home. But that morning, something had gone horribly wrong. The house showed signs of a big fire, smoke stains on the walls and charred furniture, but the flames hadn't consumed everything. Investigators noted something else: strange messages scrawled on the walls. Cryptic phrases like "my mom is evil and this is a cult house." Were these clues to what happened, or something more sinister? The police launched a full-scale investigation, cordoning off the house as forensic teams combed through the wreckage. The scene raised immediate questions. Was this a targeted act? Did the fire start accidentally, or was it set to hide something? And what about those eerie messages on the walls? Detectives began interviewing neighbors, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual in the days leading up to the tragedy. Had Saman or Vian mentioned any trouble? Did they have enemies? Or was there tension in their lives that no one knew about? Someone out there knew what happened, and detectives were determined to find them. Who could have targeted this beloved doctor and her promising daughter? To understand the weight of this true crime tragedy, let's take a moment to know Saman and Vian, who they were, where they came from, and the lives they built in the UK. Dr. Samanmir Sacharvi was a woman of compassion and intellect. Born in Pakistan to a close-knit family, she was the eldest child and only daughter of her parents, now in their 80s. She was described by her brother as the apple of their eye, cherished for her ambition and warmth. From a young age, Saman excelled academically, and driven by a passion for helping others, she pursued a career in medicine, specializing in psychiatry. Her dedication to mental health defined her professional life. Saman moved to the UK in the early 2000s, settling in Burnley, where she joined the Lancaster and South Cumbria NHS Foundation Trust in February 2020 as a junior doctor in the specialist perinatal community mental health team. Her colleague, perinatal lead consultant, remembered her as approachable, empathetic, and a joy to work with, always forming strong bonds with patients, colleagues alike. During the global issue lockdown, Saman went beyond her duties, personally delivering prescriptions to women isolating at home, ensuring they received care when access was limited. Her kindness left a lasting mark on those she served. Vian Mangrio, Saman's daughter, attended Marsden Heights Community College in Nelson, where she shone as an outstanding student. Her head teacher praised her for having a rare blend of academic talent and enthusiasm for school life. Vian loved art. Her father, Kikip Mangrio, who lives in Doha, Qatar, after divorcing Saman in 2012, was to say that her loss left his life miserable and without purpose. He recalled her as a loving, caring young girl, beloved by everyone. The morning of October 1, 2020, Saman and Vian's bodies were found. This discovery marked the beginning of a complex true crime investigation that revealed a series of alarming events. Just before 8:45 a.m., the Lancaster Constabulary received a call expressing concerns for the safety of the occupants at a semi-detached house on Colne Road. Officers quickly arrived at the location, a quiet street filled with modest homes where Saman and Vian had built their lives. What they encountered there was far from the tranquil suburban morning they had expected. Inside the house, the air was thick with the effects of a fire. Smoke stains covered the walls, and burnt furniture suggested a blaze that had been either put out or failed to spread significantly. The officers proceeded with caution. In the front bedroom upstairs, they discovered the body of Dr. Saman Sacharvi. She was lifeless, evidence indicated she had been involved in a violent struggle. An autopsy revealed that she died from strangulation. She had also been attacked prior to her death. In the upstairs area, there were signs of attempts to start a fire, but it had not successfully ignited, leaving Saman's body only partially affected by the flames. In the lounge downstairs, the situation was more tragic. Vian Mangrio's body was discovered, badly burned, making it hard to identify her right away. The severity of the fire suggested it was intentional, as flames had engulfed much of the area around her. A woolen item was found around her neck and in her mouth. Bruising in her throat indicated that she likely died from asphyxiation. Although the fire damage made it challenging for the pathologist to determine the exact cause of death, the difference between the two locations, Saman upstairs and Vian downstairs, raised important questions. Why were the bodies in separate parts of the house? Was the fire set to destroy evidence, or was it part of a more extensive plan? The officers observed unsettling messages written on the walls. These phrases seemed intentionally misleading. Vian and Saman had recently been isolating since Vian was waiting for a test result, which was ultimately negative. The timing of the messages struck the officers as suspicious. In response, the house was secured. The major crime team from Lancaster Constabulary, led by Detective Superintendent, quickly took over the case, treating the deaths as a double murder investigation from the beginning. The presence of smoke and fire damage, along with the violent circumstances of Saman's death and the condition of Vian's body, indicated that this was a deliberate act rather than an accident. Officers started canvassing the neighborhood, going door to door to ask if anyone had witnessed or heard anything unusual in the days or hours before the discovery. Meanwhile, forensic teams gathered important evidence, finding traces of potent substances in both Saman and Vian's bodies, which suggested they had been incapacitated before their deaths. These substances were later identified in court as a mixture of a sedative, wine, and fruit in a smoothie, pointing to a chilling level of premeditation. The fires also seemed intentional, one in the lounge where Vian was discovered, another in the upstairs bedroom near Saman, and a third in the kitchen, where the police believed a kettle had been ignited to simulate an electrical fire. These details implied that the perpetrator was familiar with the house, having both access and time to arrange the scene. The investigation shifted to focus on Saman and Vian's close associates, people who had been in their home on September 30th, 2020, and had the means to commit such a precise act. The discovery of the bodies marked a significant turning point for the police and deeply affected the lives of those who knew Saman and Vian. News spread rapidly through Reedley. By midday, neighbors gathered outside the police perimeter, leaving flowers and condolence notes. The police continued their work tirelessly, aware that every piece of evidence, including footprints and fibers, could bring them closer to solving the case. The investigation was in full progress, with detectives working to create a timeline of events from the previous day. They established that Saman had been at home, likely either working or preparing for the evening. Vian had returned from school around 3:25 p.m. The crucial question was, what occurred during the hours between Vian's return and the discovery of their bodies the following morning? A significant development occurred when detectives examined CCTV footage from Colne Road and surrounding areas. The cameras recorded a man visiting Saman's home on September 30th, arriving at approximately 11:26 a.m. and leaving later that evening. The man was identified as Shahbaz Khan, a 51-year-old handyman from Ribble Avenue in Burnley, who had previously done work at Saman's house. This connection raised concerns, as Khan's visit coincided with the estimated time of the crime. On October 4th, police arrested 51-year-old Khan, who is suspected of murder and arson with intent to endanger life. On October 6th, police obtained a warrant to hold him for an additional 36 hours for further questioning. Detective Superintendent Supt John Holmes urged anyone with information about the incident to contact the police, especially if they have CCTV footage, dash cam recordings, or witness accounts from the Colne Road area. The investigation into Khan intensified when officers searched his home on Ribble Avenue and discovered Saman's jewelry hidden in the loft, suggesting a deeper connection to the victims. Additionally, detectives found a purple Samsung phone at Khan's residence that contained Google searches from September 30th for terms like obsessed and define obsessed, indicating a concerning state of mind. Witness interviews provided important details. A neighbor remembered that Khan had done odd jobs at Saman's house over the years and described him as polite but somewhat reserved. Another neighbor noted that Khan's van was seen parked near Colne Road more often in the weeks before the incident, but there were no reports of suspicious behavior. Family members acknowledged Khan as a trusted handyman, and none suspected him of any wrongdoing. Khan was a father of 5 who originally came from Pakistan and had lived in Burnley for several years. He worked part-time at Tesco and also took on handyman jobs. Previously, in Pakistan, he was a computer network engineer, but in the UK, he focused on various odd jobs, including a garage conversion at Saman's home. This position allowed him to have insight into the family's life. The shocking discovery of £27,000 worth of jewelry hidden in Khan's loft, along with forensic evidence of staged fires and dangerous substances, identified him as the main suspect in this disturbing crime case. During his first interrogation, Khan's statements were confusing and strange. He claimed that a supernatural being attacked him and caused the incidents at Saman House. Prosecutor David McLaughlin later explained to Preston Crown Court that Khan's story was a weak attempt to imply that he was mentally unstable. Khan also claimed that Vian was upstairs while Saman was in the kitchen when he left the house, trying to shift the blame onto the victims or imaginary characters. On October 5th, while in custody, he threw himself across his cell, claiming that a supernatural force had pushed him. Detectives considered this behavior to be a performance rather than a genuine reaction. His claims quickly fell apart under investigation, as forensic evidence showed that the victims had traces of a sedative in their systems, indicating premeditation. Additionally, phone records revealed that Khan's device was active near Colne Road on September 30th, and CCTV footage confirmed that he left the house after 10 p.m., several hours after Vian returned from school at 3:25 p.m. Khan's wife, Rabia Shahbaz, 44 years old, complicated the investigation by providing a false alibi. This raised suspicions that Khan may have either confided in her or pressured her to lie. On October 8, 2020, Khan was formally charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of arson with intent to endanger life. The charges highlighted the brutality of the crimes. Simone died from pressure to her neck, likely caused by ligature strangulation, and had been assaulted, while Vian's death was due to asphyxiation. Her body was severely burned to hide the evidence of the crime. The arson charge resulted from 3 intentional fires set in a lounge, upstairs bedroom, and kitchen. Prosecutors later explained that Khan was motivated by his obsession with Simone's jewelry. He planned to steal it by using a sedative-laced smoothie to incapacitate both Simone and Vian. When his plan escalated, he turned to violence, strangling Simone and asphyxiating Vian before setting fires to cover his actions. The messages written on the walls were likely attempts to mislead investigators. Although handwriting experts could not definitively connect the graffiti to Khan, its content indicated that he was familiar with the victim's situation during their global issue isolation. As Khan awaited trial, detectives worked diligently to gather and solidify their evidence. The trial commenced on June 14, 2021, at Preston Crown Court. Khan pleaded not guilty to 2 murder charges and 1 charge of reckless arson. His wife, Rabia Shabazz, was charged separately with perverting the course of justice for falsely claiming that Khan had been at home all day on September 30, 2020. The prosecution, led by David McLaughlin, presented a thorough case, arguing that Khan's actions were premeditated, cruel, and motivated by financial gain. McLaughlin dismissed Khan's initial claims of supernatural involvement. Instead, Khan suggested that someone else had entered the house after he left at 10 p.m. Khan claimed that the jewelry in question had been entrusted to him for safekeeping while Simone was away, but the prosecution argued that Khan's intention was theft, which escalated to murder when he was confronted. Khan's defense initially asserted his innocence and indicated that his mental state should be examined. During his testimony, Khan described his relationship with Simone and Vian, referring to Vian as if she were a daughter. He maintained that both victims were alive when he left the house. He also stated that medication had helped clarify his thoughts, retracting the supernatural power story but not providing any credible alternative suspect. On June 29, after 3 weeks of evidence, Khan requested to dismiss the jury, expressing concerns about his mental health. However, the justice denied this request. The following day, June 30th, after being confronted with overwhelming evidence, including CCTV footage, phone records, and jewelry, Khan pleaded guilty to all charges, 2 counts of murder and 1 count of arson. This sudden change took the courtroom by surprise, eliminating the need for the jury to deliberate further but extending the suffering of the victims' families, who had already endured weeks of distressing testimony. Rabia Shabazz's trial continued as she maintained her innocence regarding charges of perverting the course of justice. Her defense argued that she was naive and confused about dates due to stress, lack of sleep, and insufficient food, mistakenly believing Khan was at Tesco on September 30th. In contrast, the prosecution asserted that her false statement made the day after Khan's arrest was a deliberate attempt to protect him. On July 1st, after less than 2 hours of discussion, the jury found her guilty. The sentencing occurred on October 5, 2021. Khan was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 34 years. The lengthy sentence reflected the premeditated and intentional nature of the murders, which were driven by financial motives. Rabia Shabazz's attempt to shield her husband, Khan, by providing a false alibi led to her conviction for perverting the course of justice, earning her a 15-month prison sentence. Early in the investigation, a second suspect, a 56-year-old man, was arrested but released without charge, narrowing the focus to Khan. Dr. Saman Mir Sacharvi's legacy endures through her compassionate work at Lancaster and South Cumbria NHS Foundation Trust, where she supported vulnerable patients during the 2020 lockdown, while Vian Mangrio's brilliance at Marsden Heights Community College continues to inspire her peers. Their loss reverberates through Reedley, a reminder of the enduring impact of 2 remarkable lives cut short on Colne Road. As of May 2025, there have been no significant updates on the case. Khan is currently in prison, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. This concludes the tragic story from Burnley, a crime tale that reveals the depths of human greed and the strength of those left behind. On July 29, 2016, Gabriella and her younger sister, Sunilda, started their day as usual. That evening, they planned to visit a nearby internet cafe to work on some school assignments. Because they didn't have internet at home, these trips to the local cafe had become a regular part of their lives. Going to the cafe was how they accessed the internet to stay connected and complete their assignments. Around 6 p.m., Gabriella and Sunilda left the house as usual, without causing any concern. But after walking a few blocks, Gabriella abruptly changed her mind. She told Sunilda that she wouldn't be accompanying her and that she was going to see her boyfriend instead. Sunilda was a little surprised but didn't ask any questions. Gabriella had gone off alone before. Gabriella assured her she would return soon, then walked away in the opposite direction. That was the last time the two sisters saw each other. Sunilda went to the cafe by herself. That evening, when she got home, she realized that Gabriella still wasn't back yet. Al principio, nadie le dio mucha importancia. Es como que los adolescentes se queden fuera hasta tarde, especialmente en verano. Sin embargo, a medida que anochecia, la preocupación empezó a aumentar. Liliana, their mother, tried to call Gabriella but got no answer. She sent messages on WhatsApp, which at first were not read. Later, the messages appeared as read, but Gabriella never replied. It was clear someone was seeing the messages, but not responding. Panic set in when a young man, whom the family believed to be Gabriella's boyfriend, showed up at their door. He asked a question that stunned everyone, because they had all assumed that Gabriella was with him. His confusion seemed real. He truly didn't know where she was. That moment changed everything. Until then, everyone had just thought Gabriella was out later than usual. If her boyfriend hadn't seen her that night, it's possible she never made it to meet him. That's when her family realized something was wrong. Sunilda remembered watching Gabriella turn a corner in the direction of a boarding house where one of their relatives had once lived. At the time, it hadn't seemed significant. The next morning, it was obvious that Gabriella was missing. Her phone was still active, but she didn't answer any calls. The mood at home grew tense. Her loved ones started reaching out to everyone they knew, relatives, friends, even her father, but nobody knew where she was. It seemed as though she had vanished without a trace. The family decided to take official action. Liliana contacted the local authorities, who then opened the missing person case. Soon after, flyers about the case were posted around the neighborhood. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers helped with the search. However, after Gabriella turned the corner and left her sister behind, no one saw her again. Gabriella Verol was born in Argentina in 1998 to Bolivian parents. Her parents separated when she was 6 years old. After her parents separated, Gabriella lived with her mother, Liliana Cham, and later started calling another man, Cesar Garcia, her father. He became her stepfather. Sunilda and other relatives from Liliana's family also lived in the same house. Life at home was difficult. The family made great efforts to create a stable home and meet their basic needs, but the atmosphere was often tense and arguments happened frequently. Gabriella frequently had stressful encounters with her grandmother, and their arguments were much more heated than typical family disputes. The adults were emotionally distant and didn't understand her, which constantly made her feel under pressure. During her teenage years, Gabriella faced the typical challenges of growing up. However, living in a home without personal space or privacy made these difficulties even harder for her. She didn't have a good place to rest or study. She dreamed of living with her biological father, who lived apart from her with another family. Pero ese deseo nunca se cumplió. Al no mantuvo una comunicación constante y también estaba enfrentando sus propios problemas personales. Eventually, the situation at home became too difficult for Gabriella to handle. She decided to leave, taking her younger sister Sunilda with her. For a time, they stayed at the house of their Aunt Marisol, their father's sister. The two sisters hadn't planned to leave permanently or thought it through carefully, but their leaving was a sign that something was wrong. They stayed at their aunt's house for about a week. Life there was more peaceful and there was less strict adult supervision, but this brief period didn't result in any lasting changes. When Gabriella returned to her mother's house, she once again found herself surrounded by the same pressure and stress she had tried to get away from. Although Gabriella was quiet, she was clearly independent. She wore simple clothes, avoided drawing attention to herself, and stayed away from noisy or boisterous groups. However, she was still ambitious. She often envisioned a future in which she could shape her own life. Unfortunately, her limited resources made it difficult to pursue those dreams. She didn't have a computer or reliable internet access at home. Even basic things like homework required her to walk to the nearest internet cafe. As mentioned before, this demanded extra planning and often led to more stress at home. In addition to these daily difficulties, Gabriella also felt a strong sense of emotional distance. Her opinions were often ignored, and her needs were rarely prioritized. Even within her own family, she felt more like an outsider than a real member. She never openly argued with her mother, Liliana. However, Liliana was always so overwhelmed by her responsibilities that she often didn't notice what her daughter was experiencing. Gabriella's stepfather fulfilled his duties, but they never developed a close relationship. There was always a distance between them. Over the years, all of this made Gabriella feel increasingly isolated. She didn't feel safe at home, and she couldn't see any realistic way to find support or make a change outside of it. Life felt like a cycle she couldn't escape, where any progress depended entirely on her own efforts. At home, there was a shortage of resources, emotional support, and space for her to grow. Her desire for independence was no longer just a normal part of growing up, it became a true necessity. This mindset began to guide her choices and actions over time. Against this emotionally vulnerable but outwardly calm backdrop, a series of events began to unfold. These events would eventually lead to devastating consequences. Nestor Quintana, born in 1986, was married to Elizabeth Cham, who is Gabriella's maternal aunt. This marriage made Nestor a member of Gabriella's family, and they frequently saw each other, as they lived in the same household. For a long time, no one in the family had any concerns about his behavior. They saw him as calm, reliable, and responsible, with a respectable job at the Argentine Prefecture, a federal security agency. He didn't raise any red flags. He stayed out of arguments, helped with household chores, and was present at family gatherings. He was a quiet part of everyday life. He lived with his wife and her family, ate meals with them, took part in family gatherings, and helped with daily chores. To those around him, he seemed like a reliable and discreet adult who handled family matters appropriately and never overstepped his boundaries. Over time, small, isolated incidents began to occur, minor things that didn't seem concerning at first, such as a strange remark or an odd situation. There was no single event, but these details gradually changed how people saw him. After he and Elizabeth separated, Nestor left the family home. He moved into a low-cost boarding house near the area where his family still lived. At the time, his relatives thought this was simply the usual thing to do after a marriage ended. This move marked a turning point. It began a new phase in which his behavior slowly changed from neutral to unsettling, even though no one could clearly describe why they felt uneasy. Even though Nestor no longer lived with the family, he still kept in touch with them, especially with Gabriella. As time passed, people started noticing that he was spending more and more time alone with her. These meetings took place outside the home, in neutral locations. Neighbors who witnessed these interactions were unsure how to interpret them. One man remembered seeing Gabriella and Nestor together on a bus. Gabriella was sitting on Nestor's lap while he softly stroked her hair. The man felt uncomfortable watching this but chose not to mention it to the family. He later admitted that he hesitated because he was afraid of causing a scene or damaging family relationships. He decided not to say anything. Other people in the neighborhood reported seeing similar things. Several residents had seen Gabriella near the boarding house where Nestor lived. At times, she would go into the building, remain there for an hour or two, and then leave quietly. No one expressed any concern when this happened. Because Nestor had once been married to Gabriella's aunt, no one thought their interactions were unusual at first. Their family relationship led people to trust them and not question their meetings. Gabriella never told anyone she visited him, and there was no obvious reason to suspect anything improper was happening. They also had no formal relationship. Nestor was not her guardian and had no legal right to be involved in her life. However, he was still somewhat connected to the family, so his actions were considered personal decisions and were not subject to supervision. Gabriella's family didn't keep track of where she was, believing she was either with friends or running errands. It was later revealed that many of their meetings took place at the boarding house where Nestor had rented a small room. He often invited Gabriella there, and they kept their visits private. She would arrive by herself and leave without drawing attention. Over time, their relationship changed in ways that went beyond simple familial affection. At the time, however, none of the adults realized how deep their connection had become. Even after his marriage to Elizabeth ended, Gabriella continued to seek contact with him. She never talked about what happened during those visits or shared any details with anyone. Only after she disappeared did people begin to understand the whole story, the clues they had previously missed. At first, there was no clear indication that Gabriella had any reason to keep secrets. She seemed calm and friendly around her relatives, but it later became clear that her relationship with Nestor was something she could not discuss openly. Reportedly, their connection began when Gabriella was just 13. At that point, Nestor was already a grown man, employed in a federal security role and married to her maternal aunt, which made the situation even more troubling. He was not just a stranger, he was a trusted adult in her home, connected to her family, and seen as safe by everyone around her. The first details of this story began to emerge when the investigation started. Friends who had never shown much interest in Gabriella's personal life began to comment. Several people admitted that they had suspected for years that something was wrong between her and Nestor. Some recalled seeing him repeatedly near Gabriella's school, offering her rides or finding reasons to be there. At first, his actions appeared to be motivated by concern, but over time they became more obsessive. The way he behaved was not what you would normally expect from a family member. He monitored her social life, tracked whom she spoke to, and showed signs of jealousy. Gabriella tried to maintain normal friendships, but Nestor's influence made her feel increasingly restricted. People close to her said that he constantly tried to contact her, often calling her repeatedly if she didn't answer immediately. Those who witnessed how urgently he needed to know her whereabouts at all times recognized this as a warning sign. In later messages used as evidence, he accused her of being distant, demanded explanations for her actions, and insisted that she account for how she spent her time when she wasn't with him. These were not isolated incidents, they formed a consistent pattern of controlling and obsessive behavior. Classmates remembered times when Gabriella would only attend events if he gave her permission. Initially, it appeared as if she was simply dealing with strict family rules or a difficult home situation. No one realized that the true reason was the pressure from an adult man who maintained a controlling environment around her. A close friend later recalled that Gabriella had once confided in her, saying she hadn't felt free in a long time and asking her to keep it a secret. At the time, it seemed like something typical a teenager might say. Later, those words would take on much deeper significance. Through the voice messages Nestor sent Gabriella, investigators made a disturbing discovery. He saw her as someone he possessed. In the recordings, his tone shifted between pleading and demanding. He accused her of cheating, doubted her honesty, and repeatedly insisted that she prove her loyalty. When Gabriella began spending time with someone her own age, Nestor started to act increasingly hostile. He made it clear that he could not tolerate her being close to anyone else, not even her friends. The investigation found that this caused tensions between them to escalate even further during that period. As Gabriella grew more distant, Nestor intensified his efforts to regain control. Meanwhile, her friends noticed that Gabriella's emotional well-being was deteriorating. She became increasingly anxious and withdrawn, and she stopped talking about her future. When she tried to leave Nestor, he responded by ramping up his manipulation. He pressured her psychologically, used emotional blackmail, made threats, and tried to make her feel guilty. Relatives living nearby had no idea this was happening. As investigators examined his actions more closely, a clear pattern emerged. He not only violated personal boundaries, but also purposely created a relationship of dependence by taking advantage of his age, his authority, and the trust the family placed in him. Gabriella's friends later confessed that, while they sensed something was wrong, they did not realize the seriousness of the situation. She remained silent out of fear, shame, and the conviction that no one would believe her if she told the truth. This silence allowed Nestor to maintain control over her for years. Gabriella grew up in a home without adequate support, which left her vulnerable. A man, initially only a relative, entered her life and gradually became a dominant presence from whom she could not escape. This situation paved the way for the tragedy that followed. After Gabriella went missing, the police launched an initial investigation. They questioned her sister, her mother, the young man she was dating, and several other acquaintances. Officers began searching the neighborhood and spoke with residents living within a few blocks of where Gabriella was last seen with her sister. Several witnesses reported seeing her later that evening walking down the street with a man. One witness specifically remembered seeing them heading toward the boarding house. Investigators believe that, given the time and place, Gabriella may have intentionally gone there. Meanwhile, some of Gabriella's friends, previously too afraid to speak up, began providing information. As more evidence was gathered, it became clear that Gabriella's disappearance was not accidental. There were no signs that she had run away or made a sudden decision to leave. She left without taking any belongings or informing anyone of her plans. After Nestor Quintana was identified as a person of interest, authorities brought him in for questioning. Initially, he appeared confident. He claimed he had not been in contact with the family for a long time, that he no longer knew anything about Gabriella's life, and that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He explained that he stayed out of family matters because he and Elizabeth were divorced. At first, his answers seemed consistent. However, investigators soon found several contradictions. Neighbors and other residents reported seeing Nestor still meeting with Gabriella. Witnesses often saw them together near the boarding house, and her friends stated he behaved in a controlling manner, evidence that directly contradicted his previous statements. The investigators intensified their questioning. Nestor was summoned for additional interviews, and with each session, he grew less confident. He began muddling the timeline, changing his story, and avoiding direct questions. Even those who had initially believed he was not involved began to have doubts. The situation shifted noticeably a few days after the investigation gained momentum. Nestor arrived at the police station without prior notice and asked to speak with an officer. This time, he admitted to having had contact with Gabriella and claimed to know where she was. Then he made a confession that changed the whole investigation. He stated that, as on previous occasions, he met with Gabriella on the evening of July 29th. According to him, they had an argument that night. Nestor said the argument escalated and, during the struggle, he lost control and accidentally killed Gabriella by strangling her. He revealed the precise location of her body, explaining that he had hidden it in his room at the boarding house, wrapped in bed sheets and plastic. He claimed that he had acted impulsively during an emotional breakdown and had not planned the act in advance. Police quickly proceeded to the location he mentioned. There, in the room he had rented, investigators discovered Gabriella's body. It was carefully wrapped in several layers of fabric and plastic bags and placed in the corner of the room. Forensic specialists arrived at the scene, determining that the body had been in the room for several days. However, because the room was sealed, decomposition had been limited. Investigators collected all nearby items for forensic examination. An initial autopsy determined that the cause of death was manual strangulation. No signs of sexual assault were found, so investigators ruled out such a motive. However, the main question remained unanswered. If the motive was not sexual assault, what provoked such a violent reaction? Some believe the act resulted from long-term emotional stress, jealousy, and an adult's inability to accept Gabriella's growing independence. Only further interviews and psychological assessments could confirm whether this theory was correct. The authorities informed Gabriella's family of Nestor's confession. The shock was immense. Her mother, stepfather, and other relatives could not believe that someone they had lived with was capable of such an act. Nestor, once regarded as a caring uncle, had now admitted to causing her death. For many people, the news was more than just devastating. It completely destroyed their trust in those closest to them. Cesar Garcia, Gabriella's stepfather, told reporters that he was struggling to understand what had happened. He said that Nestor had never acted suspiciously and was always seen as a trustworthy, ordinary family member. Gabriella's sister, Sunsilda, did not make any public statements and remained in shock. Their mother was so overwhelmed by emotion that she burst into tears. The family's grief was made even worse by a profound sense of betrayal. Although Nestor confessed, the investigation continued. Law enforcement needed to confirm whether his statements were true and to ensure he was not withholding any other information. His claim that his actions were caused by an emotional outburst was questionable, especially since he had carefully concealed the body. Investigators also looked into whether Nestor was trying to minimize his role in order to receive a reduced sentence. This issue became part of the case as it proceeded to trial. After Gabriella's body was found and a confession was made, Nestor Quintana's case entered the formal criminal investigation stage, and he was officially charged. However, during the very first court hearing, the situation changed unexpectedly when Nestor suddenly retracted his confession. He stated that the police had pressured him, used psychological coercion, and had not properly informed him of his rights. This new statement formed the basis of his defense strategy. Nestor's lawyer promptly took action to dispute all evidence that had been gathered from the confession. He claimed that the boarding house was searched illegally because there was no valid warrant. The defense also requested the exclusion of text messages, voice recordings, and witness testimonies that were collected before a lawyer was present. They argued that Nestor was mentally unstable at the time and could not understand the consequences of his words. Prosecutors remained resolute. The lead attorney stressed that Nestor's confession was both voluntary and detailed. He also pointed out that Nestor provided exact directions to where Gabriella's body was found, arguing that such specific information could not have been a coincidence. Furthermore, evidence was collected that revealed a long-term pattern of control by the accused over Gabriella, including indications of psychological manipulation and jealousy. A key piece of evidence was finding Nestor's DNA under Gabriella's fingernails, which clearly showed there had been a physical struggle. Several witnesses testified in court. Gabriella's friends spoke about the emotional distress she experienced in the months before she disappeared, describing how Nestor tried to control her, limited her social interactions, and put her under significant emotional pressure. During the proceedings, a message was read aloud in which Nestor made threats. The content had a significant impact on the jury, prompting the defense to adjust its strategy. They described Nestor as someone who was emotionally unstable and acted impulsively due to extreme stress. They stated that his relationship with Gabriella was mutual but unofficial, and that what happened was not premeditated. These claims angered Gabriella's family. Her stepfather, in particular, spoke out after several hearings, saying that attempts to defend the accused were disrespectful to Gabriella's memory. During the trial, Gabriella's mother, Liliana, remained composed and attended every session. The family was clear and united in saying that this was not a domestic dispute. It was a betrayal that ended a life already controlled and suppressed. Their lawyers argued that this was not only a breach of trust, but Nestor's position as a family member made it even worse. The prosecution requested the harshest penalty, life in prison, because of the seriousness of the crime. They pointed to the close family relationship between those involved, the long-term psychological manipulation, and the deliberate effort to conceal the body. Once both sides gave their closing arguments, the jury was sent out to deliberate and make their decision. Tension filled the courtroom. Gabriella's family sat quietly, anxiously awaiting the verdict. When the jury returned, the foreperson announced the decision: guilty of first-degree murder, with aggravating factors due to the family relationship and gender-based violence. The judge delivered the sentence without delay. Nestor Quintana was sentenced to life imprisonment. The court dismissed the defense's argument that the confession was coerced, noting that it contained detailed information and was supported by physical evidence. The fact that there had also been long-term psychological control made the charges even more serious. Nestor remained expressionless as the verdict was announced. His lawyers sat in silence, staring at the floor. Across the courtroom, Gabriella's mother began to cry, and her husband held her in his arms. This was not a victory, but a painful farewell. Justice had been served, yet their daughter was lost forever. Anthony J. Dutcher was born on May 22, 1985, in Colorado Springs, USA. He was a dynamic individual with a wide range of interests. He managed to find time for many activities, including studying various musical instruments, languages, and martial arts. He also had a love for nature and enjoyed hiking. Anthony was capable of venturing into the forest alone for a few nights and surviving without assistance. He aspired to combine his passion for languages with his interest in martial arts, dreaming of a future as a translator, serving in the military, or pursuing a related career. Those who knew him described him as friendly, sociable, family-oriented, and ambitious. Anthony always made time for his loved ones, including his grandparents, Carl and Joanna, who lived in the small, close-knit community of Guffey, Colorado, which had a population of about 100 people. In Guffey, everyone knew each other, and the atmosphere was always peaceful and quiet. It was located an hour-and-a-half drive from Colorado Springs. Anthony loved visiting his grandparents because they lived in a peaceful, natural setting where he could explore the outdoors. Their tiny town had only a few dozen houses spread across the Great Plains. His grandfather, Carl Dutcher, was born in 1940. He served in the Army for 20 years before becoming a machinist, and for the last 13 years of his career, he worked in government positions, achieving significant success. His wife, Joanna, was born in 1942, had a diverse career as a cosmetologist, nurse, and store salesperson. Carl and Joanna had known each other since childhood, grew up together from the age of 7, fell in love, and married in 1964. Since then, they have been inseparable. They had 3 sons. After retiring, they moved to Guffey to enjoy their later years peacefully. There, they established a farm, started agricultural activities, and raised animals. Joanna was very sociable and active, while Carl preferred to stay at home and garden. He enjoyed working on their land. When Anthony visited, they purchased a small plot below the farm where Anthony built a hut. This hut was on a hill, offering a beautiful view of the surrounding area, including the family farm. Anthony and his grandfather constructed the hut several years ago. By the time Anthony turned 15, he began visiting more often, much to his grandparents' delight. They shared many interests, which helped them develop a close bond. On New Year's Eve, December 31, 2000, Anthony was 15 years old. He was going to celebrate the holiday with his grandparents. Since his parents were going out, his grandparents happily agreed to take care of him. The Dutchers dropped Anthony off at his grandparents' house on the morning of December 31st, where preparations for the evening's festivities were already underway. Later, Anthony's friend Isaac Grimes, who was also 15, planned to join them. The boys had been best friends for a long time and were set to go on a holiday camping trip to Anthony's cabin. Shortly before midnight, Anthony's mother called him. They exchanged greetings, both feeling anxious that the phone lines might be busy when midnight struck. They chatted for a while and agreed to reach out to each other on the morning of January 1st, after everyone had woken up. Anthony promised to call as soon as he got up, as he usually wakes up early. However, when his mother woke up in the morning, she did not receive the promised call or even a message, which she found odd. Anthony usually sent a congratulatory message that would arrive at night in case the lines were overloaded, but that didn't arrive either. At first, she didn't worry, thinking it was a night of celebration and rest. She also knew that the boys had planned to go to a remote hut where the connection might be weak. However, when neither the grandparents called nor responded, her concern began to grow. She decided to reach out to her relatives to understand what was happening, but none of them picked up her calls. Anthony's mother, Jennifer, tried multiple times to contact at least one family member, but no one answered until January 3, 2001. At that point, she could no longer dismiss her worries with excuses about camping or the holiday, so she called the police to request a welfare check on her relatives. Law enforcement responded quickly. When they arrived, they discovered a chaotic scene. An exterior examination showed signs of forced entry. Someone had broken into the house through the back door. Inside, everything was in disarray, and many items were damaged. When the patrol arrived at the kitchen, they discovered Carl Dutcher unresponsive on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. He had been shot twice in the chest. Concerned that the shooter might still be nearby, the officers drew their service weapons. There was no gun found beside the body, indicating that a crime had likely taken place. As they entered the hallway, they discovered a woman's body on the floor next to a broken toilet in the bathroom. It was Joanna. She was lifeless, lying in a large pool of blood. She had been shot 6 times, making it clear that her death was a murder, not an accident. The family was particularly concerned because Anthony was missing from the house. The police cordoned off the farm and initiated an investigation, focusing on locating Anthony first, as he might need help. Jennifer confirmed that he should have been with his grandparents at that time and couldn't have left for home alone without informing anyone. Anthony was declared missing, and a search was launched. The Dutcher family was devastated by the events and chose to travel to Guffey to help search for Anthony. Jennifer informed the police that her son planned to spend the night at a cabin in the forest, but she couldn't explain its exact location over the phone. The forensic still experts continued to investigate the site of the attack. It appeared to be a sudden and unprovoked assault. Carl seemed to have walked into the kitchen and was shot without any warning. He didn't have time to defend himself and showed no signs of struggle. Joanna, on the other hand, might have had slightly more time to react. The assailants attacked her, forcefully hitting her head against the edge of the toilet before shooting her. She likely tried to protect herself, as one of her hands was shot through. The bullet struck her head after entering through her palm, leading to her immediate death. She was presumably the second victim of the attackers and may have attempted to escape to the bathroom for safety, but it was futile. Members of the Dutcher family who arrived in Guffey, they reported that Carl had a strong interest in firearms. He owned a variety of guns, including different models of pistols and rifles, which he restored and sold as a hobby. At the time of the crime, there were several dozen firearms in his house. It was crucial to determine what might have been stolen. The son of Carl, Charles, assisted in this investigation, he sharing his father's passion for guns and having a rough idea of what was in their collection. This was an important lead, as the firearms were not stored openly but rather in a locked gun cabinet. For someone to find, open, and steal a gun, they would need to act with intention, suggesting that the criminal was familiar with both the victims and the location of the gun cabinet. Detectives started to entertain the theory that Anthony, the missing grandson, might be the killer. They were unsure about his fate. It was theorized that he could have taken a weapon and harmed his family before fleeing. However, Anthony's parents firmly rejected this idea. They emphasized that he loved his grandparents deeply and had great relationships with all his relatives. Furthermore, he did not have any mental health issues and had never run away. Overall, there were no known problems with him. Anthony's parents guided the police to the campsite in the woods where Anthony intended to spend the holiday with his best friend Isaac Grimes, in a cabin. Jennifer was hopeful of finding her son alive, believing he might be hiding there to escape any danger. The campsite was located about 500 meters from their home, situated on a hill obscured by thick vegetation. Several armed police officers, along with her, made their way to the site. When the police entered the scene, they quickly spotted a sleeping bag with someone inside and another empty bag nearby. There were also board games scattered around, suggesting they had started playing. Unfortunately, Jennifer's hopes were shattered. Anthony was present, but tragically, he had been murdered. His throat was deeply slit, nearly decapitating him. The attack was brutal, leaving him without a chance to defend himself. It appeared he was caught off guard and killed in cold blood, and the single, powerful blow indicated that the killer was experienced. Detectives found this particularly troubling. The precision and force suggested it was not the killer's first murder. Despite their efforts, the police could not locate the weapon used in the stabbing. The parents were thoroughly interviewed, sharing everything they knew about Anthony's belongings. It seemed the attacker had taken some valuables, which could assist in the investigation. Notably missing was a watch given to Anthony by his grandparents for the holiday. It was a significant, adorned with a blue flame design. On that day, another 15-year-old boy, named Isaac Grimes, had been at the campsite. This accounted for an extra sleeping bag and game set up in Anthony's cabin. It was clear that at least 2 people were present, but the other sleeping bag was empty. The police were now looking for another potential victim. They first decided to visit Isaac's home since he lived nearby. To their surprise, they found him there. 15-year-old Isaac Grimes opened the door calmly. He was alive and seemed unharmed. Isaac explained to investigators that he had initially planned to go to his relatives with Anthony on New Year's Eve to set up a tent camp. However, at the last minute, he decided to cancel his plans with Anthony because other friends invited him to a party in Colorado Springs. The party was organized by high school students, and Isaac chose to attend. He stated that he never reached the Dutcher's house, had not seen his best friend, and was unaware of what happened to him. Isaac was deeply saddened by the news of Anthony and his grandparents' deaths, but there was something troubling about how he was acting. Unfortunately, Anthony's mother wasn't certain if Isaac had visited Anthony that evening. They hadn't talked about it during her conversation with her son, but she did know that Isaac had been to the cabin with Anthony earlier. Anthony had taken him to his secret spot, which was meant to be kept private from everyone else. The detectives decided to confirm Isaac's statement by finding out who he attended the party with that night. Reluctantly, he provided the names of 2 classmates, Jonathan Matheny, who is 17, and Glenn Urban, who is 18. The police reached out to both boys, and while they were willing to talk, their accounts were surprisingly similar. It seemed as if they had rehearsed their stories, using the same phrases and wording, which is unusual during interrogations. However, this similarity alone was not sufficient to charge them. The police needed evidence linking them to the crime scene. Regardless, Jonathan and Glenn, along with Anthony's best friend, Isaac, remained under suspicion. It was unclear whose sleeping bag was found next to Anthony's body in his cabin. Following this, the autopsy report was released, showing that all the victims, Carl, Joanna, and Anthony, had died on New Year's Eve. This strongly suggested that the killer had targeted the family specifically, as he knew where to find each of them. The attacker must have been familiar with the Dutcher family, since very few people knew about Anthony's secret cabin or Grandpa's gun cabinet. This theory was further supported by the fact that Carl's house had weapons. He had a habit of always carrying a gun with him before opening the door and typically kept it near the entrance. For an American living in a remote area, having a gun can be crucial for self-defense. This practice was so common that the grandfather would even greet his children and grandchildren while holding a gun. However, Carl unprepared when the attack occurred. The assailant or assailants were careful and left no evidence in the house. It was believed that Anthony was the first victim and was likely killed by a single attacker. The house assault might have been carried out by another individual, as suggested by the different behavior, style, and weapon used in the attack. Nonetheless, these theories could not be confirmed. The investigation lasted for 2 months. No useful evidence had been discovered. Then, on March 6, 2001, Isaac came to the police station, terrified for his life. He shared a bizarre story about being chased by a man with a shotgun who had killed his best friend's family. Initially, this seemed like paranoia, possibly the result of the boy being deeply affected by the recent murders of 3 people. However, given this new information, the detectives began to suspect something more and decided to re-examine the events from New Year's Eve. One of the investigators recalled the watch mentioned by Anthonia's parents. When they met with Isaac, they asked him about it. He claimed he had seen the watch on his friend, which was the biggest contradiction in the investigation. The watch had only been given on New Year's Eve, so Isaac couldn't have seen it unless their meeting occurred just before midnight. This conflicted with Isaac's earlier statements. It became evident that Isaac had been in the house and knew more than he let on. It appeared that the investigation was making progress. On March 8, 2001, Isaac Grimes and his parents were called in for an official questioning. He maintained that he had not been at his friend's house on the night of the incident. The police then shifted their focus to the watch, effectively exposing Isaac's lies in front of his family. This investigation led to the discovery of an army jacket with blood stains in the victim's house. Eventually, Isaac succumbed to the pressure of his conflicting statements and confessed. Isaac shared the truth about what occurred on New Year's Eve. He explained that just before midnight, his classmate Jonathan Matheny brought he over to Anthony's house. The boys greeted each other, exchanged holiday wishes, and then went to a campsite together. There, they spent time as friends, played games, and shared stories. Anthony was unaware that his best friend had hidden a knife. As they were about to go to bed, Isaac distracted Anthony by pointing out a light in the window. When Anthony looked away, Isaac approached him from behind, drew a knife, and stabbed Anthony in the throat with great force, resulting in a fatal injury. The medical examiner was later shocked to discover that a 15-year-old boy could inflict such a deep wound with a single strike. Isaac acknowledged that he had applied all his strength in the attack. Jonathan Matheny arrived at the Dutcher farm around 4 a.m. with a rifle. He waited at a distance for Isaac to return, and then they both entered the house to confront the elderly couple, breaking down the back door. The noise disturbed the homeowners. Joanna and Carl got up, and Carl went to the kitchen to see what had happened, likely intending to scare off the intruders, unaware they were there to kill them. Jonathan shot Carl first while Isaac just watched. Carl fell to the ground after a couple of shots. Terrified, Joanna fled to the bathroom and locked the door, hoping to hide, but Jonathan had no intention of leaving any witnesses. He forced open the bathroom door, struck Joanna's head against the toilet, and then shot her. It's important to note that both perpetrators were still in school. Jonathan was 17 and Isaac was only 15. Isaac later stated that he simply followed his older friend and watched as he committed these crimes. The criminals knew about the weapons Carl owned and took several with them. They loaded the weapons into a car trunk and drove to the house of Glenn Urban, 18-year-old. They gave him a knife and a rifle that had been used to attack two people, instructing him to get rid of the weapons, making him an accomplice. The police could not determine the motive behind the crime, and Isaac refused to speak. The source of the rifle was also unknown. 17-year-old Jonathan Matheny was arrested right after he confessed, but he claimed he was not involved in the triple murder. Then Glenn Urban was taken into custody. He initially denied any involvement but eventually confessed. Glenn revealed that he had been instructed to dispose of the weapons and provided important information. He alleged that another teenager, Simon Sue, who was 18 at the time, played a key role in the crime. Glenn stated that Simon was the one who planned the massacre, chose the targets, directed the operation, and devised a way to cover up the evidence. At Simon's urging, Glenn was instructed to destroy the weapon. He took it apart and disposed of the pieces in various locations. During the investigation, the detectives learned about Simon for the first time and decided to question the other two people involved in the crime. However, those still individuals refused to speak. It was revealed that Simon had a lonely and unloved childhood, with very little social interaction during his school years. He met Isaac, Glenn, and Jonathan while in high school. Isaac and Simon became friends through their shared interests in chess and video games. All three of them were socially awkward and had few friends, wishing desperately to be more popular. Over time, Simon gained influence over the group, promising them a more exciting life. He claimed to be part of a secret organization and said he had connections with a rebel army in Guyana. This behavior was similar to recruitment methods used to attract socially isolated schoolchildren who want to belong to something bigger. It soon became clear that Simon had deceived them all. When they became part of this organization, they underwent intense training that included using firearms and throat-cutting techniques. Simon assigned progressively tougher and more brutal tasks. It got to the point where he compelled them to eat and drink to the point of exhaustion, referring to this torment as a test of their willpower. In the end, he manipulated the teenagers so thoroughly that they couldn't picture their lives outside of this organization in completing Simon's demands. Simon ran the club like a military unit, assigning each member a military rank to inspire them to serve him better. He forced the boys to give him a portion of their money and punished them harshly for disobedience. One of the ongoing activities was watching disturbing videos of real animal and human killings. When Isaac voiced his concerns and showed signs that he felt something was wrong, Simon labeled him a traitor. He threatened Isaac with violence and demanded that he prove his loyalty to the group, all while being pressured by two older boys. Isaac was given the task of killing his best friend, Anthony, to prove his loyalty to the team. Jonathan was tasked with getting rid of Anthony's grandparents. Both were supposed to retrieve several weapons from Carl's house. Since they lived nearby, they were aware of his interest in weapon restoration and knew about his gun cabinet. It was not difficult to find out the location thanks to Anthony. But why was the Dutcher family chosen as the victims? The motive for the triple murder of these individuals remained a mystery. According to sources, Carl may have made some unpleasant remark about Simon, which could have provoked hatred. However, there was no confirmation of this. All the students claimed that Simon set them against Carl because the real motive might have been the presence of firearms, which Simon wanted to acquire. When the police raided Simon Sue's house with a warrant, they quickly found evidence that corroborated what the other teenagers had said. Specifically, they discovered several items stolen from Carl. It appeared that real preparations for another crime were underway. The manipulator was found to have several dozen firearms, all of which had been stolen during various assaults. However, prior to the tragedy at Carl Farm, these assaults had not been violent. There were at least 30 pistols and rifles in the house, which now needed to be examined. Despite being 18 years old, the leader of the gang had his own warehouse, containing even more weapons, spare parts in various stages of disassembly, and ammunition. There was a whole arsenal stored there, including an AK-47. According to the police, it could arm a small infantry unit. Simon was taken in for questioning. Despite being a quiet and unloved young man, he turned out to be very cunning and cynical. He refused to admit guilt, claiming that Glenn, Isaac, and Jonathan were the real criminals who wanted to make him the scapegoat. According to Simon, he was in Canada at the time of the attack and had nothing to do with what happened. Of course, the leader of the gang lied. He denied forcing his friends to engage in various extreme activities and described the club they allegedly belonged to as merely an entertainment community. He immediately began to proclaim that all three accomplices had mental and behavioral issues, labeling all of them as aggressive. It was clear he had prepared extensively in case he was caught. Ultimately, it was decided to try all the criminals as adults for the triple murder. Isaac Grimes pleaded guilty to the murder of Anthony Dutcher, his best friend. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Jonathan Matheny and Simon Sue were charged with organizing criminal activity, planning murder, and the legal possession of weapons. Jonathan Matheny was also charged with double murder. In the end, Jonathan sentenced to 68 years in prison, while the ringleader, Simon Sue, was sentenced to 53 years in prison. For aiding the criminal group and disposing of the instrument of the crime, Glenn Urban was sentenced to only 2 years in prison. It was proven that he did not plan or commit the crime, though he was fully aware of his friend's plans and did not help prevent the atrocities. Isaac's mother still cannot believe that her son committed such a horrific crime. She struggles to understand how her sweet, kind son, Isaac, turned into a real monster under the influence of a dangerous manipulator. Isaac himself explains his participation in the murder by stating that he was intimidated and threatened. He was warned that if he did not obey and fulfill his role, his family would be killed, which left him feeling forced to stab his best friend. After beginning his sentence, Isaac wrote a letter in which he expressed remorse for the crime he had committed. Some of Anthony's relatives do not believe Isaac's story about intimidation and think that he could have gone to the police, which could have prevented anyone from being harmed, neither his family nor the Dutcher family. Dutcher family feel that the sentences given are too light. They believe Simon and Jonathan should receive the death penalty for the brutal killings of innocent people. Anthony's mother expressed forgiveness towards Isaac and even testified on his behalf during the trial to help lessen his sentence. She thinks that Isaac was manipulated by Simon. After her son's death, she was so heartbroken that she attempted to end her life twice. Despite this, she continues to write letters to Isaac and feels compassion for him. The tragic end of the Dutcher family story is a heartbreaking reminder of human complexity and the consequences of psychological manipulation. The case not only claimed the lives of Anthony, Carl, and Joanna, but it also left deep wounds in the hearts of the family and the community. Although justice was served through the convictions of Isaac, Jonathan, Simon, and Glenn, the Dutcher family's loss remains irreparable. Jennifer's act of forgiveness toward Isaac reflects love and compassion while also raising questions about personal responsibility and the effects of manipulation. Now more than ever, this story draws attention to the need to protect young people from negative influences and reminds us of the value of family and community engagement in preventing similar tragedies. On a calm November morning in a close community in North Carolina, 13-year-old Hania Aguilar had taken her aunt's car keys that morning so she could start the car before school. That's when a witness saw a man dressed in black with a yellow scarf covering his face approach the girl and force her into a green 2003 Ford Expedition. Her terrified scream filled the air as the vehicle drove off. This event sparked a heartbreaking mystery that disturbed the entire community. What happened to Hania? Hania Aguilar was born on March 21, 2005, in the United States to Miguel and Celsa, who are both immigrants from Guatemala seeking a better life. Hania was remembered by family and friends as a cheerful, loving, and kind-hearted girl with big dreams. She was outgoing, dedicated as a daughter, sister, and friend. She leaving a positive impact on those around her with her friendly demeanor, engaging conversations. From a young age, she had a deep passion for music, often filling her home with the sounds of her violin. In 2018, Hania's family was living comfortably in Rosewood Mobile Home Park in Lumberton, North Carolina, a neighborhood mainly populated by Hispanic immigrants. Hania, 13, was an outstanding 8th grade student at Lumberton Middle School. However, on the morning of November 5, 2018, their peaceful life was disrupted. Around 7 a.m., while Hania was warming up the family vehicle outside their home, a stranger approached her from behind. He grabbed her and pushed her into the vehicle. A nearby neighbor heard screams and saw a man dressed in black with a yellow bandana forcing Hania into the green SUV, which quickly drove away. Hania's younger sister, who was outside at the time, witnessed the horrific event. Authorities were notified right away, and by 10 a.m., an Amber Alert was issued for Hania. She is a 13-year-old Hispanic girl, about 125 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. On the day she was taken, she was wearing a blue floral shirt, blue jeans. The Lumberton police, assisted by local and federal agencies, began a thorough search. Helicopters flew over the Rosewood area, and police officers stopped cars entering the region, asking drivers for any information. During a press conference, the police chief announced that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had shared Hania's details with authorities in Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and South Carolina. Investigators indicated there was no evidence that Hania was acquainted with her abductor. Her family was fully cooperative throughout the investigation. The community, friends, and neighbors joined law enforcement in the search, showing their support, concern. On November 6th, Celsa made an emotional appeal through the FBI, expressing her profound love for her daughter and her desire for her safe return. She forgave those responsible and said her only wish was to reunite with her daughter. The case swiftly attracted national attention. The FBI, working with the governor's office, announced a $20,000 reward for any information that could help locate Hania. On the same day, a surveillance video was released showing the stolen green 2003 Ford Expedition shortly after the abduction. Authorities encouraged anyone with home surveillance footage that might be helpful to come forward. The vehicle had peeling paint on the hood, a sticker on the rear window, and North Carolina license plates. The next day, the Ford Expedition was discovered abandoned in a wooded area about 3 miles from Hania's home. Evidence from the vehicle was sent to the FBI laboratory in Virginia for analysis. Later that day, the FBI released a disturbing video showing a man walking purposefully through the area, as if stalking his target. This footage unsettled viewers, disclosing the calculated nature of the abduction. Notably, he was the only person seen in the area at the time of the abduction. This crucial footage aimed to identify the man and assess his possible involvement in the case. Authorities urged the public to assist in identifying the suspect. The investigation intensified as the community remained hopeful for Hania's safe return. As the search became more urgent, investigators turned their attention to a new lead. They believed that the girl's unique white Adidas sneakers, which had colorful stitching on the heel, could be key to finding her. Authorities speculated that the captor might have discarded the sneakers and urged the community to report any related discoveries. The FBI emphasized the need for public vigilance, reminding everyone that even the smallest detail could be important. They carefully analyzed the evidence and used media outreach to request assistance. The search for Hania was highlighted on the FBI's website as the most wanted case of the week. A Spanish-language podcast was released to ask for tips. Additionally, authorities directly appealed to hunters in Robeson County, asking them to check any surveillance footage for signs of the green SUV to figure out when and how it had been left behind. By Thanksgiving, the investigation had generated over 800 leads, interviewed more than 400 people, and analyzed extensive surveillance footage. However, the holiday was incredibly painful for Hania's family, filled with a profound emptiness. Friends and neighbors described the day as excruciatingly sad. The loss of Hania's laughter felt deeply. The community united, offering prayers and finding comfort in their collective hope that she could sense their love, no matter where she was. On November 27, 23 days after her disappearance, the investigation took a tragic turn. Authorities found a body at 4:45 p.m. in a shallow pond, located 10 miles from the abduction site. The body was face down, unclothed, covered by a folding table, with branches and leaves in the hair. Due to advanced decomposition, immediate identification was not possible, but dental records confirmed the identity later. This discovery shattered any remaining hopes of finding Hania alive and deeply affected her family. Neighbors gathered outside their home to provide support and prayers. Lumberton's police chief confirmed the tragic news. He was visibly upset and expressed deep sympathy for Hania's family. The medical examiner later determined that her death was caused by homicide, likely due to asphyxiation from pressure on her throat. There were also indications of abuse violence, but the extent of decomposition made some findings unclear. Authorities, along with the FBI, pledged to keep seeking justice, reassuring the public that they would not stop until those responsible for this terrible crime were brought to justice. The news of Hania's death shocked the community, especially among Hispanic residents, who united to seek justice for her. About 10 days later, authorities made an important discovery. Michael Ray McClellan, a 34-year-old man with a history of abuse offenses, was arrested while on parole at the time of the abduction. Investigators found DNA evidence from an unsolved 2016 abuse-assault case that connected Michael to Hania. His arrest provided some sense of closure, but the sorrow over Hania's loss continued to weigh heavily on everyone who knew and loved her. On December 8, Michael went before a state magistrate at the Robeson County Detention Center and was formally charged with multiple crimes related to Hania. He was denied bail and faced a total of 10 charges, which included first-degree murder, first-degree abuse, abuse offenses against a minor under 15, first-degree abuse assault, statutory sexual offense with a minor, first-degree kidnapping, aggravated assault, felony restraint, child abduction, and concealing a body. The prosecution indicated that more charges might be added following the final toxicology and autopsy reports. Investigators believed Michael's actions were driven by racial prejudice and stereotypes, particularly against Hispanic communities, based on a false belief that these communities were vulnerable and involved in banned substance or money. Evidence showed that he intentionally targeted victims in places like the mobile home park where Hania lived. As the legal proceedings continued, Hania's funeral took place, drawing over 1,000 attendees, many of whom wore her favorite color, purple. The ceremony included balloons, flowers, and heartfelt speeches from family and friends. During the funeral, Celsa shared her last moments with her daughter. She spoke of her daughter as someone whose life was tragically cut short, but whose joy could never be taken away. With tears in her eyes, she promised to remain strong and support other families facing similar losses. She also thanked the authorities for their efforts to bring her daughter home. During the service, photos of Hania were displayed. Her friends read heartfelt letters and played her favorite song, 1,000 Years. Her white coffin, with her name in gold letters, was carried by a horse-drawn carriage to a cemetery in Lumberton. After the funeral, the case attracted controversy when District Attorney Johnson Britt revealed that the sheriff's office had DNA evidence that McClellan could be a suspect in the 2016 abuse, but investigators never followed up. According to Britt, an email with that information was sent to the sheriff's office in 2017, copied from the district attorney's office. At the time, Britt said that information should have given the sheriff's office probable cause to obtain a search warrant, take a DNA sample from McClellan, and compare it to the 2016 abuse kit. 3 weeks before Hania disappeared, the Fairmont Police Department issued an arrest warrant for Michael. He was charged with theft and unlawful restraint related to a failed car robbery. However, this warrant was not acted upon until November 13th, which was 8 days after Hania's abduction. Additionally, on October 17th, the State Parole and Post-Release Supervision Commission issued another arrest warrant for parole violations, but no action has been taken regarding this matter. At a press conference, the prosecutor criticized the sheriff's office for mishandling evidence. He argued that the information received in 2017 should have led officers to collect DNA samples from Michael much sooner. After an internal investigation into these mistakes, the Robeson County Sheriff's Office apologized to Hania's family on January 18, 2019. They announced the firing of an investigator and noted that a senior officer with over 34 years of experience, who had been suspended, decided to resign. Police department leaders expressed their anger over the situation, highlighting that issues like improper report handling, inadequate investigations, and poorly conducted interviews indicated a systemic problem. They found these failures very concerning and called for major reforms. In the following years, the family's hope for justice diminished due to ongoing legal delays. The global issues worsened the situation. Hania's mother expressed her frustration from the justice system. During a pre-trial hearing, she urged the judge to expedite the case, claiming that the system had failed her family. On the other hand, Michael's defense argued that the global issues significantly restricted their ability to meet with him. They also had to manage 2 other unrelated felony cases involving Michael, further contributing to the delays. The Superior Court judge informed CELSA that it might take up to 5 additional years after the global issues for such a complex case to reach trial, emphasizing the importance of thoroughness to avoid mistakes that could lead to a retrial. Michael's trial underwent multiple delays and was finally rescheduled for early 2024. During this period, the community kept Hania's memory alive by commemorating her on her birthday, the anniversary of her passing, and other special occasions. Family and friends arranged events to honor her. Neighbors and former classmates remembered her as a beautiful young girl whose life ended too soon, someone who should have enjoyed a long and happy life. On the 2nd anniversary of her passing, CELSA shared that, as a mother, she could no longer look forward to Thanksgiving or Christmas. Her grief had overwhelmed her. These once joyful holidays had turned into painful reminders of her loss, making them hard for her to bear. Michael McClellan was finally brought to trial at the Robeson County Courthouse in North Carolina, where the prosecution aimed for the death penalty. They argued that the severity of his crimes warranted this ultimate punishment. During his transfer to court, Michael made a daring attempt to escape by using a homemade handcuff key. This attempt failed as officers quickly restrained him, but he tried again just hours later, showing his desperation to evade justice. The Robeson County Sheriff suggested that Michael had hidden the makeshift key under his tongue, but it became stuck in the handcuffs during his second attempt. As a result, security measures were significantly increased for the rest of the trial. In court, Michael pleaded guilty to all the charges against him. Confronted by Hania's grieving mother, he gave a brief and disturbing confession. He admitted to kidnapping Hania from her driveway, assaulting her, killing her, and disposing of her body. He also revealed details about earlier attacks in 2016 and 2018, highlighting his pattern of violent behavior. These admissions had a significant impact on his sentencing. The court sentenced Michael to life in prison without the chance of parole. Hania's mother felt both relief and sadness following the sentencing. She expressed gratitude to the authorities and the community for their strong support during the long and difficult process. Although no punishment could reverse the tragedy, She mentioned that the sentence provided her family with a sense of justice and closure. The FBI special agent who led the investigation also felt satisfied with the verdict, hoping it would bring comfort to Hania's family and other victims impacted by Michael's crimes. However, what seemed to be the end of a painful chapter took a surprising turn. While Michael was being transferred to the North Carolina Central Prison in Raleigh, he attempted to escape again. He struck the latch of a guard's firearm holster, causing the weapon to become loose. Michael briefly grabbed the gun, but the transport vehicle's driver reacted quickly, slamming on the brakes and allowing another officer to take the weapon away from him. After a brief struggle, officers used pepper spray to subdue him. Michael then surrendered and was placed in a high-security cell, with authorities considering adding more charges to his already lengthy criminal record. Despite his persistent attempts to avoid justice, Michael is set to spend the rest of his life in prison. The case had a lasting effect on the Hispanic community in North Carolina, increasing their fears and mistrust of local authorities. Community members pointed out the failures of law enforcement in the early investigation and demanded reforms to prevent similar negligence in the future. Kapunda, South Australia, was a quiet town where residents felt secure. Inside the Rowe family home, it appeared calm, the lights were off, the house was silent, and the family was asleep. However, just after midnight, a violent struggle ensued. An intruder had entered the house, and in moments, the Rowe family's home became a scene of terror. The next morning, everything appeared normal from the outside. The house seemed unchanged, and nobody was aware of the events that had transpired just a few hours earlier. It would take several days for neighbors to become concerned and to recognize that something was seriously wrong. What happened that night? In 2010, the small town of Kapunda in South Australia was a place where everyone knew each other, life was calm and relaxed. One notable family in the community was the Rowes, who lived a simple but fulfilling life. The father, Andrew Rowe, had moved from England to Australia with his family when he was 3 years old. They settled in Adelaide. As a child growing up in the suburbs, Andrew was friendly and had a passion for fishing trips with his dad. His laid-back personality made him approachable and likable to those around him. As a young man, Andrew met Rose, a lively and cheerful woman who was just a year younger than him. They connected immediately and soon became inseparable. In 1985, they married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Their happiness grew with the birth of their son, Christopher, in 1987, and later their daughter, Chantel, in 1994. They then started a carpet cleaning business that quickly thrived, giving them financial security. By 2010, Christopher had moved out and was living with his girlfriend nearby, while 16-year-old Chantel was managing both school and a part-time job at a local cafe. That year, Chantel encountered an unexpected challenge. She found out she was pregnant. Despite the obstacles ahead, she was determined to create a future for her child, with her boyfriend, Dylan, providing steadfast support. Life in the Rowe household continued normally until the night of November 8, 2010. Events that unfolded that night would deeply shock the town and lead investigators to search for answers in one of the most brutal crimes the region had ever experienced. After midnight, an intruder broke into the Rowe home and committed a violent massacre. The crime scene was horrifying, with blood covering the floors, walls, and ceiling. Surprisingly, it took 2 days for anyone to notice that something was wrong. Concerned neighbors, disturbed by the unusual silence and lack of activity from the Rowe home, decided to investigate. Looking through the windows, they were met with a shocking sight. Andrew and Rose were found dead in the kitchen, their bodies severely mutilated. Chantel was discovered in her bedroom, and the brutality of her murder was even more unsettling. Each family member had suffered numerous stab wounds, becoming victims of a brutal and merciless attack. The autopsy provided horrifying details. Andrew had been stabbed 29 times, Rose over 50 times, and Chantel 33 times. Disturbingly, Chantel had also been assaulted prior to her murder, making the tragedy even more incomprehensible. While vacationing in Queensland with his fiancée, Christopher first learned about a crime in his hometown through social media. Investigators first focused on Christopher, the lone survivor of the Rowe family, but soon cleared him as a suspect. The investigation took a chilling turn when authorities uncovered disturbing details. After the murders, the killer did not flee in a hurry, rather, they took their time. Evidence indicated that the perpetrator changed into clean clothes and even rested on Chantel's bed. Drag marks revealed that she tried to hide but was pulled from her hiding spot. Robbery was ruled out as a motive since nothing was stolen, valuables like electronics and cash were untouched. The brutality of the crime suggested either a personal vendetta or the actions of someone with a disturbingly cruel nature. Furthermore, parts of the crime scene seemed to have been wiped clean, suggesting an unsuccessful attempt to eliminate evidence. Bloody footprints led to the front door of the row home but suddenly stopped outside, indicating that the killer deliberately removed their shoes and exited in socks to avoid leaving more evidence. The most shocking discovery was the absence of forced entry. This indicated that the murderer was likely someone the family knew and trusted or had found a discreet way to enter. As investigators looked into the gruesome crime scene, they found that Rose had suffered the most. She had been stabbed over 50 times, much more than the others. She initially survived the attack and managed to make a phone call for help before the killer realized she was still alive. Unfortunately, before she could escape, the murderer came back and continued stabbing her until she was silenced for good. As investigators faced this harsh reality, they began to identify possible suspects. Andrew and Rose had no enemies, financial issues, or ongoing disputes that could explain such a violent crime. This left them considering one probable motive: Chantel. At only 16, Chantel was juggling school, a part-time job, and preparing for her baby's unexpected arrival. Her boyfriend, Dylan, had been supportive throughout her challenges. They had been together for a year, shared the same school, and made plans for their future. Although Dylan, also 16, seemed like an unlikely suspect, the police needed to be thorough in their investigation. They questioned him, verified his alibi, and searched for any reason someone might want to harm Chantel or her family. Dylan cooperated fully from the beginning. Heartbroken, he candidly expressed his love for Chantel, their hopes of raising their child together, and how the news of her murder had devastated him. He had a strong alibi, as he was celebrating his grandfather's anniversary in another city, with numerous witnesses to confirm his presence. With Dylan eliminated as a suspect, the investigation faced another frustrating standstill. However, the police had a significant asset: the killer's DNA. Forensic teams had gathered samples, including seminal fluid, which could lead directly to the murderer. Yet, when they checked it against the national database, they found no match, indicating that the perpetrator had no previous criminal history. Another important detail came to light: the murder weapon was one of the knives from the Rose kitchen. This indicated that the attack might not have been planned in advance, but rather a spontaneous act of violence. Additionally, the killer had taken the knives with him, removing a key piece of evidence. The estimated time of death was between midnight and 2 a.m. A neighbor later revealed they heard Rose scream for help around 1 a.m., followed by a loud thud, but assumed it was just a heated argument and did not call the police. With few clues and no obvious suspects, investigators reached out to the public for help, hoping to make progress. They received numerous tips, but most were misleading, consisting of wild theories, hoaxes, or leads that went nowhere. Just when it seemed like the investigation had stalled, Dylan remembered something important. The night before Chantel's murder, she had been unwell. She had a fever and had called her boss to inform them that she wouldn't be coming to work the next day. At precisely 5 a.m., Dylan texted her to check on how she was feeling. His message was read, but there was no response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Chantel had already been dead for several hours, and it was someone else in the house who had read his message. The most frightening discovery followed. The killer had attempted to reply to Dylan's message, but since Chantel's phone had no credit, the message did not go through. This was a failed effort to make it look like she was still alive. With this unsettling clue, detectives began to investigate Chantel's social circle, looking for anyone who might hold a grudge. They soon encountered Jason Alexander Downey. Jason was part of the same school group as Dylan but hardly knew Chantel. He appeared innocent, of average height, thin, and quiet. Detectives started with the intention of asking Jason a few standard questions and moving on. However, as the interview progressed, his behavior became concerning. Instead of responding straightforwardly, he appeared nervous and avoided direct answers. Unexpectedly, he also claimed to have an alibi for the night of the murders, even though no one had inquired about it. The contradictions in his statements were quite troubling. Investigators collected fingerprints and DNA samples from Jason for comparison. He complied readily, showing an unusual calmness that momentarily led them to question their suspicions. However, they soon noticed several recent cuts on his palms. When asked about them, Jason attributed the injuries to an accident at a machine shop, but the wounds appeared too clean and precise, resembling injuries from gripping a knife. Forensic experts quickly found the answer. Jason's fingerprints matched those found on Chantel's bedroom door exactly. The belief that the murderer needed to be big and strong was incorrect. Jason, who was thin and seemed harmless, had overpowered 3 individuals in a sudden outburst of rage. Even more alarmingly, he deceived almost everyone around him. He even went to Chantel's memorial, laid down flowers, and pretended to mourn with her family and friends. Originally from Scotland, Jason had relocated to Kapunda with his mother and older brother. While his life appeared normal on the outside, there was a much darker side hidden beneath the surface. Chantel and Jason were never really close. She was polite to him, didn't dislike him, but she also didn't have any strong feelings for him. To her, he was just another member of the group. In contrast, Jason's feelings toward her were more intense. He had previously tried to show interest in Chantel, but she had rejected him. When he learned that Chantel was pregnant with Dylan's child, it triggered his jealousy. Jason's obsession had become overwhelming, and on the night of November 8th, his emotions hit a peak. When police first questioned Jason after his arrest, his unnerving calmness surprised the detectives. He denied any involvement, speaking with a disturbing confidence as if he could dismiss the growing evidence against him. He claimed that his fingerprints at the row home were from a visit several weeks prior, but that was not the only untruth. Forensic analysis showed that Jason's DNA was found on Chantel's body. When confronted with this evidence, he told an implausible story, insisting that he and Chantel had been intimate during his last visit. However, the science was clear: DNA cannot stay viable on a body for weeks. It had to be recent. During the interrogation, Jason eventually broke down and shared a troubling account of the events from that night. Earlier, he had a fierce argument with his mother and stepfather, which left him feeling frustrated and angry. As a result, he decided to sleep in his car. However, after learning from Dylan that Chantel was homesick and vulnerable, his feelings for her took a disturbing turn. What began as a simple plan to drive past her house turned into something much more alarming. He parked his car at the end of the street, out of sight, and approached her home. The house was dark and quiet, except for one bathroom window that was ajar. Being thin and agile, Jason managed to slip through the small opening easily. Once inside, he waited in the bathroom for nearly half an hour, listening to ensure that the house was completely silent. He later claimed his only purpose was to confess his feelings to Chantel, but this raises questions. If that were true, why did he bring a kitchen knife with him before entering her bedroom? The investigators quickly recognized that Jason was not being honest. He hadn't come to share his feelings, he wanted to manipulate Chantel. As soon as he entered her room, she sensed something was wrong. When she pushed back against him, it triggered his anger. In a blind rage, Jason grabbed a knife and attacked her, stabbing her multiple times. The noise alerted her parents, who rushed to help, but Jason, now completely engulfed in violence, turned the knife on them as well, brutally killing both. Later, Jason attempted to argue that his actions were a crime of passion, but the evidence pointed to something much more sinister: premeditation. As the police investigated further, they uncovered more incriminating evidence. They found a pair of blood-stained shoes left in a remote location. The DNA on them matched all 3 victims. The shoe prints also matched the bloody footprints at the crime scene. Additionally, Jason's sweat was discovered inside the shoes, adding to the evidence against him. Although he occasionally cooperated, offering to lead detectives to where he supposedly discarded the murder weapons, those weapons were never found. The police believed he was trying to manipulate the investigation and buy time, even as more evidence piled up against him. By the fall of 2011, almost a year after the murders, Jason Alexander Downey was on trial. Throughout the trial, he remained strangely emotionless, frequently changing his statements but never expressing genuine remorse. He claimed to have no memory of killing the Rowe family, even though there was strong forensic evidence proving his guilt. A particularly disturbing detail came to light during the trial. After the murders, Jason took Chantel's pendant and chain as a twisted trophy, serving as a grim reminder of the girl who had rejected him. Jason's intense feelings of rejection drove him to commit horrific acts. When he eventually pleaded guilty, it wasn't because he felt sorry, rather, it was a strategic choice to receive a lighter sentence. One investigator remarked, his guilty plea should not be interpreted as remorse. These murders were brutal, premeditated, and shocking beyond comprehension. On April 17, 2012, Jason Alexander Downey was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. If he had not pleaded guilty, he would have had to serve at least 45 years before being eligible for parole. In a last attempt to manipulate the situation, Jason wrote a letter to Chantel's family and friends. In the letter, he expressed regret and claimed he deserved his punishment. However, the sincerity of his apology felt superficial and insincere, similar to a child being forced to say sorry instead of a man who genuinely regrets his actions. For Christopher Rowe, who lost his entire family in a single night, no sentence could ever replace what he has lost. To honor his loved ones, he decided to tattoo their names on his body, a lasting tribute to his parents and sister, who he will never see again. After the tragic event, Christopher stepped away from work to heal from painful memories. When he came back, he struggled to adjust to his previous life. Eventually, he took over his father's business. Marilena Rosari was a 58-year-old woman living with her husband in Castellanza, Italy. They had 2 grown daughters who lived on their own and had children of their own, making Marilena a grandmother. She worked as a promoter in supermarkets located in the province of Varese. By 2017, she viewed herself as a successful individual, enjoying a peaceful life while taking care of her family. On Sunday, July 30, 2017, Marilena and her husband visited a mutual friend's house for dinner in a nearby town. They spent a few hours there before returning home together to Castellanza. It was a typical quiet evening for them. However, once they arrived home, her husband had other plans. He planned to visit his elderly mother in the nearby town, as she was unwell and needed help with housework. He was absent all evening and night, returning home the next morning around 10:30 a.m. He expected to find his wife at home since she usually left for work later. Typically, at that time, she would be enjoying her morning routine, having breakfast, getting ready, and occasionally doing some cleaning. To his surprise, Marilena was missing. Initially, her husband thought she might have gone to work earlier than usual, possibly due to a last-minute request. However, Marilena always communicated any changes to her schedule and would not just disappear without notice. Moreover, that morning, she had planned to spend time with him to discuss their future plans and some important matters. He started to feel anxious and tried to reach Marilena. After several unsuccessful attempts to call her mobile phone, he noticed it was turned off, which was unusual for her as she was always reachable during work hours. When he checked the house, he discovered more worrying signs. Her bag containing personal items and documents was missing, but her car was parked in the yard. This was strange since she never left without her car. Concerned, he went outside to look around the neighborhood. He talked to several neighbors who were awake and working in their gardens, but none of them had seen or heard anything unusual. He also called his daughters, but they had not heard from their mother either. Marilena's phone still remained off. Feeling restless, he decided to contact the police. However, they informed him that they could not file a missing person report until 24 hours had passed. It was not until July 31st, when he returned to the police station, that his report was finally accepted and the search began. During this time, he couldn't get in touch with Marilena. He reached out to everyone who knew her, including her daughters, relatives, and colleagues, but no one had seen her. By the time the police acknowledged the report of her disappearance, the management and staff at the supermarkets were already worried because she hadn't shown up for work in 2 days. Marilena was known for her punctuality and reliability. She never missed a shift, so her absence raised great concern. The police interviewed all of Marilena's co-workers. They were shocked by her disappearance and found no indications that anything was wrong. No one was aware of any issues she might have been dealing with, nor did it seem like she had plans for a long trip or any reason to leave unexpectedly. The last person to see and talk to Marilena was her husband, making him the first person law enforcement wanted to question. Detectives interviewed him multiple times to understand what happened before her disappearance. They aimed to find out if the couple had any issues that might have led Marilena to leave or if anyone harbored ill will toward her. Her husband found these suggestions ridiculous and dismissed them, stating that their family had never been involved in crime or shady activities, and they did not have any enemies. Detectives interviewed Marilena's friends and found that they had no useful information. Her husband mentioned one concerning detail: the family was facing financial troubles, owing €10,000 to the bank. However, this lead seemed unhelpful since they were consistently making payments on the loan. He also provided documentation proving that both he and Marilena were fulfilling their financial obligations without issues. The police explored various possibilities, ranging from a voluntary disappearance to a potential crime, but after several days, they had no concrete answers. Meanwhile, Marilena had not used her phone or bank cards, raising concerns about her well-being, as it's difficult for anyone to survive long without money, a phone, or a car. A press conference was held to gather more information about Marilena's disappearance, and a television appeal was broadcasted to raise awareness. The prosecutor's office requested a detailed description of the missing woman, which was shared on all channels along with a call for eyewitnesses to come forward. Unfortunately, this effort did not lead to any new information. To assist with the search, specially trained dogs were brought in. The dogs were taken around the house and the area by the gate, but they remained calm and did not indicate any scent. The courtyard and Marilena's car were also searched without any success. Additionally, Marilena's relatives appeared on television, made several public statements, and directly reached out to her in hopes of getting a response. Days went by, but Marilena was still missing. The critical timeframe for finding her alive had passed, and anxiety deepened as troubling thoughts arose. Her husband and daughters felt increasingly worried. Law enforcement still issued a nationwide appeal through various media to widen the search efforts. Meanwhile, relatives created and distributed flyers featuring Marilena's photo throughout the city. A week later, the police had almost lost hope of finding her alive and shifted their focus to the surrounding area, trying to identify anyone who might have been involved in her possible murder or kidnapping. Naturally, close relatives, especially her husband, became suspects. He was the last known person to have spent time with her. He claimed he was at his mother's house during the time she went missing, which raised suspicions. After appearing on television, he acted cautiously, seemingly avoiding drawing attention to himself. He explained this behavior by saying he wanted to evade media scrutiny, but law enforcement grew suspicious that there might be a more concerning reason behind his actions. Consequently, they began to investigate him more thoroughly. Detectives confirmed that the evening after her husband brought her home, he went to help his sick mother with housework. Neighbors saw them arrive together, and several witnesses confirmed that he left almost immediately afterward. He was not seen again until the next morning. Neighbors near his mother's house also supported his story, stating he arrived late in the evening, and the timing matched perfectly. CCTV cameras along the road recorded his car traveling to and from his mother's house at the times he mentioned. His alibi appeared solid and did not raise any suspicions. However, investigators were not quick to remove him from the list of suspects, as close acquaintances are often implicated in such cases. Therefore, they returned to that neighborhood hoping to gather more information from former neighbors. Local residents were interviewed, and detectives meticulously investigated Marilena's previous social circle to find any suspicious individuals who might have had an interest in the kidnapping or potential violent actions. At this stage, her husband appeared to be an unlikely suspect for several reasons. He and his wife were widely regarded as loving partners with minimal disagreements. He had no financial incentive to cause her harm, and he had a solid alibi. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to progress as new leads surfaced. After speaking with the couple's acquaintances at their former residence, the Carabinieri shifted their focus to Vito Clerico, a 64-year-old man who was well acquainted with Marilena and her husband, lived nearby. From the outset, Vito displayed a cautious demeanor and seemed anxious. During questioning, he changed his story multiple times, which raised significant suspicions. The investigation team focused on Marilena's neighbor to gather more information. Background checks revealed that he had no criminal record, and his relationship with Marilena did not initially cause any concerns. A mutual friend mentioned that they met at work when Marilena was a promoter at shopping centers. This was Vito working as a storekeeper at Marilena's workplace. Their jobs frequently brought them together, leading to regular communication. The friend described Vito as irresponsible, noting that he had a history of borrowing large amounts of money from others and either not repaying it or repaying it late. There were also rumors that Marilena had lent him money during their time together, which could suggest a possible motive for the crime. As a result, he was called in for questioning. During the interview at the station, Vito described receiving a call from Marilena on the night she disappeared. She asked to meet him at the station in Garbagnac Milanese, explaining that her husband was visiting his sick mother and could not assist her. She mentioned having important business in the city. Vito, being friends with her, agreed to meet, but Marilena never showed up. Initially, he thought she changed her mind and went home. However, several aspects of his story seemed suspicious. First, the timing was too late for any business dealings. Second, the timeline Vito provided did not align with the information the police had confirmed. According to the timeline, Marilena should have been preparing to go to the station while she was with her friends, but no one confirmed that she had any plans to go anywhere or contacted anyone. Additionally, since her husband was nearby, she could have asked him for help. All of this seemed illogical. Due to these inconsistencies, detectives decided to investigate Vito's account further. They discovered that his mobile phone was never registered on the route he claimed to have taken. Furthermore, he was not seen on any surveillance cameras, including those at the station. If Vito was telling the truth, he should have appeared on video. The most intriguing discovery was that the detectives found a woman in the recordings who looked like Marilena. This indicated that she had indeed visited Garbagnac Milanese, from which she never returned. Upon examining Vito's mobile phone, the detectives confirmed that he had received several calls in the days leading up to her disappearance. Marilena had repeatedly tried to contact him, but he had consistently ignored her. However, on the night she disappeared, there was no call from her to him. Instead, there was a single outgoing call from Vito to her number on the evening of July 30th, 2017. This evidence directly contradicted his account of events. During the conversation, one of the detectives spotted dark red stains on Vito's trousers that looked like blood. Vito quickly claimed that he raised rabbits and that the stains might have come from butchering one of them, as he owned around 40 rabbits. However, the police doubted his story, confiscated the trousers, and sent them to a lab for testing. The analysis confirmed that the stains were human blood, specifically matching that of Marilena. Vito was unable to explain this finding. On September 11, 2017, he was arrested, 40 days after Marilena had disappeared. He was charged with murder and concealing her body. During interrogations, Vito provided confusing and inconsistent accounts that varied from day to day, filled with odd details, but he did not provide any clear confessions or truth. Eventually, he was worn down and agreed to tell investigators where Marilena's body, while still denying that he was the murderer. He claimed he helped the real killer hide her body out of fear for himself and his wife. Vito was compelled to assist in disposing of a body, and he kept the identity of Marilena's killer a secret. On September 12, authorities began excavating his backyard, specifically in a small garden in Garbagnac Milanese. At the exact spot Vito indicated, they found a shallow grave approximately 40 centimeters deep. Inside, they discovered a decapitated body wrapped in multiple layers of polyethylene and placed in a bag, which was partially covered in concrete. The advanced decomposition of the remains and the missing head complicated the identification process. Although the clothing resembled Marilena's, there were no identifying features, like tattoos, scars, or fractures, to confirm her identity. As a result, identification needed to be made using dental records. In the meantime, police continued to search for the missing head. Vito, for unknown reasons, refused to cooperate with law enforcement. His behavior was quite unusual, leading them to suspect he might be feigning mental disorders to claim insanity during the trial and evade punishment for the murder. It was revealed that he had been diagnosed with minor mental health issues in the past and had taken medication, but he had recently stopped. Eventually, under pressure from detectives, Vito started talking again. He claimed that he not only helped hide Marilena's body but also beheaded her after the murder. He said a certain killer had ordered him to do this. The decapitation was a deliberate act to make identification more difficult. Vito stated that he had thrown the head in a dumpster. Given how much time had passed, it was likely that the head had already been taken to a dump outside the city, making it nearly impossible to find. However, the authorities were skeptical. Every claim he made needed to be verified. While interrogating Vito, the police also spoke with his family members. One of them mentioned that Vito owned several plots of land. He recalled seeing Vito heading toward one of the most remote plots the day after Marilena's disappearance. This plot was an abandoned field located between Garbonate Milanese and the town where Marilena lived. The suspect owned property there but typically did not visit without a valid reason. The family members speculated that Vito might have gone to this isolated area to dispose of Marilena's head. Before beginning their search for the head, the police rechecked Vito's mobile phone. This allowed them to confirm that he had indeed traveled to that location, helping to narrow down the search area. A large search team was organized, which included specially trained dogs. The task was made more difficult by the thick growth of blackberries in most of the area. The team thoroughly searched the abandoned field. A few hundred meters from the road, they found a bag hidden in the bushes. It was the same bag that Marilena usually took with her for errands and shopping. Inside the bag was Marilena's head. On September 26th, the body was finally confirmed to be that of Marilena Ree, a 58-year-old woman who had been missing. However, one question still lingered: what was the motive behind her murder? It is believed that it was likely connected to financial issues. Investigators discovered that in 2014, Marilena had loaned Vito and his wife a significant amount of money, approximately 80,000 euros, from her savings. Vito had persuaded a mutual acquaintance that he and his wife were struggling with the bank due to overdue loans and were at risk of losing their home. Trusting his word, Marilena lent him the money, believing he was honest. In the following years, Vito repeatedly delayed paying back the debt, relying on Marilena's patience and her lack of urgent financial needs. However, Marilena eventually needed the money and requested a quick repayment. When Vito failed to return the funds, she had to take out a bank loan, planning to pay it off as soon as she received her repayment from Vito. Despite her growing insistence on getting her money back, Vito still did not repay the debt. On that significant evening, after her husband went to visit his mother, Marilena likely chose to confront Vito about the money. It is unclear how she ended up in the nearby city. During their discussion, Vito refused to return the money, which prompted a violent reaction from Marilena. This led to a conflict that escalated into a fight. A forensic expert noted that before Marilena was beheaded, she was hit on the head with a blunt object at least 6 times. The specifics are hard to determine due to multiple fractures in her skull and facial bones. Additionally, the remains had deteriorated significantly, complicating the examination further. After the murder, Vito cut off his victim's head, buried the body in a shallow grave near his house, wrapped it in several layers of plastic, and partially covered it with concrete. He had only a small amount of building materials, which was insufficient to fully hide the burial site. He placed the head inside her bag, took it out of town, and threw it deep into the thorny bushes on his remote property, hoping it would never be discovered. Even though the reconstruction of the events was supported by various pieces of evidence, Vito did not confess to the crime. Searches of his house and car found traces of blood and indirect evidence suggesting that he was not alone in committing the crime. Unfortunately, not all details could be uncovered. Vito completely denied any involvement of his wife or anyone else, claiming that a third party was responsible but refusing to identify them. After several interrogations, he ultimately took the blame for the crime. Vito's defense attorney claimed that his confession was coerced, noting that he had been questioned at least 10 times and believed his rights were violated. Initially, he only admitted to hiding the remains but did not confess to murder. However, he later claimed to have killed Marilena. Eventually, his story changed again, and he denied everything. The lawyer suggested that someone else must have committed the crime, indicating the possible involvement of a third party. However, this theory could not be supported by witnesses or the evidence gathered. Without any solid leads on the identity of this mysterious person, the idea was dismissed. All of Vito's inconsistent statements, which raised suspicions among investigators, were attributed to an effort to protect his wife. The next step focused on Vito's mental state. Psychiatric evaluations were performed, which found no significant issues. The prosecution claimed that the concealed body, beheading, and the discarded bag far from the city pointed to premeditated murder, a well-planned crime. It was clear that the defendant had intentionally lured the victim into a trap. However, despite the strong arguments and evidence, Vito cleverly kept altering his story, apparently aiming to confuse the investigation. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Vito tried to argue that the prosecution was biased against him. His lawyer suggested this was to make him a scapegoat and resolve the case quickly. The accused also mentioned having amnesia, which he said prevented him from remembering the days surrounding Marilena's murder. He ultimately confessed to hearing voices of demons that had tormented him for years, leading him to kill Marilena. However, these claims were disproven through investigations, and multiple witnesses stated they had never seen him exhibit signs of mental illness. Throughout the investigation, Vito remained calm and did not show signs of significant stress, which is uncommon for someone with mental health issues. The only medical condition identified in him was epilepsy, but he experienced seizures very rarely. Even if they happen more frequently, aggressive behavior is not typical for those with epilepsy. Detectives were intrigued by Vito's desperate attempts to shift the focus away from his wife. From the start, she appeared to be a potential accomplice in the murder. Investigators viewed her as more dominant and assertive than Vito, leading them to suspect she might have been the mastermind behind the crime. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more compelling information. Marilena was not the only woman deceived by Vito. He frequently borrowed large amounts of money from relatives, friends, and colleagues, ranging from 30,000 to 100,000 euros, to finance the construction of his house. This project became an obsession for both Vito and his wife, who had long dreamed of building a grand villa. To achieve their goal, they took on significant debts and loans, often borrowing again just to make payments and delay the associated issues of non-payment. By the time Marilena was murdered, they were under immense pressure from creditors. It is likely that everyone who lent them money was in danger, just as Marilena was. Due to the extensive examinations needed for a thorough investigation of the deceased's body, the burial did not take place until 10 months after the body was found. The funeral was held on June 1, 2018. By the end of January 2019, the trial of Vito began. From the start, his inconsistent statements, confessions, and retractions created a sense of distrust. The defense attorney struggled to effectively counter the prosecution's arguments, achieving only limited success in reducing the charges. Initially, it was thought that the murder involved torture, but a forensic expert later confirmed that the severed head and some of the body mutilations occurred after death. On January 24, 2019, Vito, who is 66 years old, was sentenced to life imprisonment. He appealed the verdict, but his appeal was rejected. Investigations into his wife's possible involvement in Marilena's death are still ongoing. On November 21, 2017, Vito was attacked in prison by his cellmate. His cellmate used a metal plate and a makeshift weapon during the assault. Vito reported that he had tried to stop all communication with his cellmate, who had made clear abuse advances that escalated into harassment. When Vito threatened to report his cellmate's behavior, he was attacked. While in prison, Vito continually expressed his dissatisfaction with the justice system, insisting on his innocence and asking for safety from his hostile cellmate. Despite his requests, he was sent back to prison after receiving treatment. On Sunday, November 29, 2020, he was found dead in the prison toilet. In his hand was a note that powerfully criticized the Italian law enforcement. He died after swallowing a garbage bag, which obstructed his airway and led to suffocation. Many suspect that he did not take his own life and that the incident was planned by his cellmate.